Welcome, worldographers and world builders alike, to episode 18 of the World Hammer, where I read lore from across the multiverse and perhaps yours. All the entries seen here are submitted by talented writers from our Tovia Discord community based on a daily prompt project called Build Together and tagged for World Hammer. If you would like your own works read aloud, you're not only welcome, but encouraged to join our Discord and submit your own. Now back to the Forge to see what's been built. Now, despite our ongoing event, the Autumn Forge, which is basically art fight but for writers, where we can exchange fan fiction with fellow passionate world builders and writers, we still have a pretty sizable episode, so look forward to another great set of writing. For day 544, the prompt was, how is revenge viewed in your setting? Is there any systems or traditions in place around revenge and how it's carried out? And this comes from Alex in the Discord. Kendamarania writes, Roaring Rampage of Revenge, an entry in City of Woe. Audio excerpt from The Shaxian Horn Presents, a Corpesian radio program, dates July 31st, 1941.
Good morning, demons, sinners, and fallen angels. This is your host, Pictora, coming to you live from Fraud. Don't turn that dial. Dear listeners, tell me, when was the last time you've used the services in Lust? Personally, I like to fill lonesome nights visiting Incubus hotels over on Cleopatra Square. Certainly, the succubi and incubi over there are quite popular, but we advise to be careful sleeping around there. That's right, folks. The Nightwalker strikes again with her fifth victim. This time, the target, a Spanish friar named Damaso Ibarra, was found impaled on an iron spike on the head and force-fed scoops of salt and several bullets lodged into his head, with a sign hung around his make stating, I betrayed my God and people for my useless body. Inside his coat was several photographs of succubi he was in contact with, indicating he killed at least two. When the CCPD investigated his apartment in Heresy, they found several letters of blackmail from the Nightwalker threatening to return him back to his punishment. Friar Ibarra was found revived and conscious upon his discovery and is currently awaiting trial in Chiron Island for battery, drug possession, and 2 accounts of murder. This M.O. of including photographs of succubi is traditional of the Nightwalker, who began her serial killings in the winter of 1938. All of her victims have similar backgrounds of being murderers of succubi and taking advantage of the young women. With 5 murderers on her record, this vigilante has garnered quite a reputation in Lust, a real roaring rampage of revenge from the looks of it. Opinions are mixed on her. Some say she is in the right, bringing retribution to the pimps and madams who abuse and endanger their succubi, as well as nasty clientele such as Ibarra. Others say she is a public menace, taking things too far, that the police should take care of it. The Nightwalker's identity is unknown, likely being a Lilitu prostitute, personally connected with all these succubi. It is rather clear that this is personal to her. The CCPD also issued a 500 drachma bounty on the Nightwalker for anyone who can bring her corpse. God knows how successful that may be. This isn't Wild North Times, after all. We would like to ask you, listener, is she right as a killer of murderers, protecting innocent women through utter bloodshed?
Lots of fun. I love diegetic world building stuff like this, and Kendamarania does it really solid. These in-world radio programs that give you all this, all these tidbits. I mean, the Nightwalker is this well-known character. The broadcast host is someone who sounds like they speak about things often, is familiar with the populace is familiar with her. It's a really cool, feeling of being just put in the space. Nugget writes, In the Name of the Keeper, an entry in Petrichor. Thaddeus Vane is a man blinded by a crown made of locks and keys, a common motif of the Keeper and a symbol of the cages its followers often create themselves. Revenge is seen as part of the Keeper's domain, secrets and betrayal, after all. Conquest and man against their fellow man, but that does not mean people encourage siding with the gods. After all, with the amount of pain they cause, most pray to avoid their attention and wrath. But then there are people like Thaddeus. People who were not fortunate enough to fly under the radar, who are loved by their gods. Everyone around Thaddeus leaves and betrays him. His mother, Edward, everyone. But they do not mean it, right? It's the Keeper, whispering in their ear. It's the Keeper who is doing this, so he made a deal, both with himself and with the divine. He'll do what they want, whatever they want. The Keeper is the god of secrets, knowledge, and betrayal. Fine. He'll make sure no one can get close enough to hurt him again. He will light the city on fire in order to burn every bridge he has. He will chop off his brother's head and leave his sister in the dirt after turning her own plans against her at the last moment. He will shoot himself in the jaw to prove himself, and there will never be enough blood to make up for everything that's happened to him. He does whatever the Keeper wants so that it will no longer hurt him. Thaddeus is perhaps the character I get saddest about whenever I think about the possibility of the gods not existing. That maybe the world is just a dark and cruel place that screwed him over, and he took it out on everyone who actually still cared about him in retaliation. He is blinded by a crown of locks. The Keeper waits for its victims to convince themselves of its will. Yeah, good carrying through with the motifs of really questioning the reality of the deities, or whether or not this is a culture's justification for bad things happening to people, a way of attempting to see a silver lining in it, even if it's quite the dark silver lining. For day 545, the prompt was, what locations in your world do people often visit for leisure? And this comes from Kendamarania in the Discord. Curio Heart writes, Paradise, an entry in Valley Forge. World building by Auhminous and Curio Heart. Valley Forge is a city with entertainment everywhere. Yet, genuine leisure remains exclusive to the wealthiest, or those willing to take the biggest risks in a place designed to make them careless. In a city like Valley Forge, entertainment is everywhere. Even the poorest places in the city contain businesses catering to nearly any form of entertainment one can imagine. From the latest games and music to acted shows on large and small screens alike, and the sensational yet touchless brain dancing that can allow someone to live through someone else's memories. For all its variety, describing any activity within Valley Forge as leisurely would certainly earn some strange looks. Forgers aren't known for slowing down, after all. They're known for being incredibly active, often to their own detriment. Unless, that is, you're a part of the city's upper echelons. With enough money, one can buy access to the only park in the city, located in the city's southwesternmost district, District 7, best known as Paradise. By far, Paradise is the largest district in the city, though its sole formal border lies along its southeastern edge where it meets Centrifuge, District 6's colloquial name. Entrance is permitted only to the residents and guests of the Wall and Overlook. These are the two wealthiest districts in the city, where wealth is expressed through bunker-like homes built into the mountainsides or the fortified castles that stand on top of them, respectively. Paradise itself is known to the city as a large park hosting sprawling fields, a large forest, its own lake of crystal clear water, and food grows unattended year-round. The temptation to visit is strong, especially in the depths of winter when food is scarce in the rest of the city. Only rumors of what exists within keep the rest of the city out. On rare occasions, corpses are found in Centrifuge, and once or twice as far away as mid-spillway. On their own, they mean little. Together, they are noteworthy for the mysterious pattern they present. Each is found with strange pieces of metal, dull as dark granite, and made in unusual shapes and fitted together while permanently affixed to something they're wearing. Their bodies show the same inexplicable deterioration from the inside out. Investigations quickly identify the bodies as belonging to bounty hunters, assassins, and serial killers who had gone missing within the months prior. Only years later were the bodies connected to Paradise after survivors recognized familiar gaits and silhouettes in video feeds from the areas of Centrifuge near the district. Those rumors and the huge, heavily guarded barrier between District 6 and 7. To the creative, getting in is fairly easy. Head into the mountains on either side of the barrier or take a long enough route around, and entry is only as difficult as one's climbing and hiking skill makes it. Some routes are even passable by vehicle, assuming one has a steady enough hand on the wheel. When entry is made during the day, whether through the gates for the wealthy or taking a longer route for the more intrepid, one finds an environment where, regardless of the time of year, there is no need to hurry. Wildlife activity is high, with plenty of birdsong and animal calls to entertain while one treks through Paradise, taking whatever fruits and berries one pleases. A keen eye, ear, or nose, however, might detect nocturnal creatures active during the earlier and later hours of the day. Kind of fascinating that Auhminous and Curio Heart sort of use this to inject a bit of mystery, a bit more mystery from Valley Forge. We haven't had a Valley Forge entry in a while, so some maybe newer listeners might be a little bit unfamiliar with them. But Valley Forge is a fun setting, kind of a cyberpunky, frozen-over landscape. And this Paradise place sounds like something that sort of defies that, with the wealthy elite, as they are often want to do. Great stuff. Fun to have some Valley Forge back. Bulbman 5000 writes, Loran, the abundant land, an entry in Seraph. Loran, a name often known more so as the name of the Laren Alliance, the alliance between multiple nations such as those of the Uran and Fangora. However, it is, in fact, the name of a region as well. Laren is a small land surrounded by tall mountains, most easily accessible via tunnels from the deep. Its surface is covered in densely forested area as well as hot springs, rivers, and a large lake, making it a very welcoming locale. Long ago, numerous people of different civilizations came to Loran simply to relax, but when they all encountered each other, they discussed the details of their homelands, and an idea sparked within each culture. The peoples of each nation wanted to work together to survive the Scourge horrors. And so their leaders listened and decided they would cement their alliance in the very land where the idea sparked, within Loran itself. And so the alliance gained its name, a name that would prove to be a beacon of hope for many and an irritation for the Gathar and Scourge alike. Okay, so Loran is a region in which people have agreed that it's sort of joint ownership, it sounds like. I'm hoping I'm getting that right. It's an alliance between multiple nations, and it's also a region that functionally exists as none of their individual borders in all of their land, and this bothers some of the other people, like the Gathar. Kind of fascinating. I think that only constructive criticism here is the same that I give to a lot of shorter stuff, which is just that we could have probably used a little more info about the specifics. I think it would have been really interesting for us to dive into, how is it shared? What is the agreement really like? Some more details would have been fun, not required necessarily, but I think that's what I felt like I missed the most here. Otherwise, a fun idea. I really like it. It would be interesting to see, how have you world built this out to feel believable, because this kind of thing is pretty rare for a good reason. NYUX writes, The Nightlife of Xandra. Even within the different areas of the cities of Xandra, people are divided in two, the day crowd and the night crowd. This is because of the strict and faction-wide curfew and the even further class divide it caused. Even though the weather-controlled domes cause both day and nighttime to appear the same hazy dusk, only night being darker, the day and night crowd are vastly different. The day crowd are mostly filled with people who obey the regulation and try to keep their noses clean. The most common hangout spots by them are often private residences, given how strictly monitored all legal and regulation-following establishments are. Most people only go out during the day for commuting/essentials and otherwise stay at their residences during what little free time they have. The night crowd, on the other hand, are the rest of them. All those who are against these ludicrous rules and guidelines and regulations set by the ever more oppressive government. In some areas of even the higher areas of amount of traffic at night has made the government surrender them to areas of least concern when it comes to curfew enforcement. The majority of the faction's real hangout spots are operated almost exclusively at night and without government sanction/oversight. The most popular of these being bars and clubs, but extending as far/mundane as grocery stores, clinics, and hairdressers. They all vary in levels of illegality, but the majority being normal stores without official government registration. After the surge of these unlicensed operations after the curfew, the government tried to crack down on them harshly, but after more and more appeared, they loosened their grasp. Now, they only actively take down operations with gang ties, the majority, with a focus on ones threatening their own government operations. Kind of fun that there's, in this Xandra situation, almost more of a cultural divide between day and night life as opposed to a true natural divide between the two. And so you still get similar reactivity to who is out when and where, but it's almost a construct of sort of the laws and belief systems of the people there. It's kind of a neat concept. For day 546, the prompt was, are there any metals that hold value beyond their uses for metallurgy and other crafts like gold or silver? If so, why? And this comes from Alex in the Discord. Pro in the Great writes, Brickonite, an entry in What Lies West. Brickonite, also named West Gold, is an incredibly rare alloy comprised of gold, adamantine, silver, and an as of yet unknown final element that stabilizes the compound, as normally gold and adamantine react in a volatile explosion when melded with heat. The unknown final element, which seems to disappear when reheated, resulting in an explosion as the adamantine and gold mix when hot, does not conduct electricity, does not rust, maintains a certain hardness and durability between every single sample, and glows a faint yellow color when exposed to graviturgy. This fourth element, boringly named the fourth element, is perplexing to all who examine it. There's a very real possibility that this material, which is metallic, comes from the deep. Without the means to enter the deep, at least not safely, it's impossible to know the compound's origins fully. The fourth element, in particularly dense chunks of briconite, nullifies magic within a certain area, scaling up with the alloy's mass. Within the forlorn graveyard, a single lone door stands at the end of a well-marked path inside the region. This door is completely comprised of briconite and weighs an estimated 30 tons. The material is impervious to all damage, all magic, on account of being made of briconite, and further dispels magic within 100 feet. The chamber within is suspected to also be comprised of briconite, as arcane teleportation cannot pierce well behind the door, though it's possible that adventurers have simply overestimated the chamber's vastness within. Scholars and recorders both hold value in briconite for different reasons, with scholars seeing the material as historically significant, and recorders whittling down the metal into scalpels that can cut through magic barriers used by some monsters, even in death. Most adventurers will never get a look at briconite in their entire lives, with thus far only 7 samples being found in 40 years, other than the giant door within the graveyard, of course. Very cool. I like this a lot. You've added the constructive criticism tag, which you've started to do, Predwin, which I think is fun. It kind of makes me think more about your entries sometimes when I do see those tags, to be fair, because I'm trying to find something, I guess for lack of a better term, wrong with it. Not really that that's a correct way to term it. I don't think it's something wrong, but something that I feel is missing, or something I feel is could be improved upon. The only thing I felt was missing here was maybe a little bit more of a recorder or a researcher's perceived use cases of this. Something like, oh, we would love to get our hands on making this because we could create, magical armor, or, magic nullification armor and shields and things, or the messing with the ideas of this problem that it creates and the potential problems that it maybe solves could be kind of fun. I know that you're also cramped for time lately and doing the Autumn Forge, so clearly sometimes I think it's just what you can get on the page, but that was the main thing that I was thinking of. But I do really like this. There's the great coverage at the beginning, especially I like, of the what it's made out of, why it's confusing. That stuff's been covered fantastically and really has me kind of invested in this extra metal that feels more special than typical, fun random fantasy metals. Bulbman 5000 writes, Alum Iron, an entry in Seroth. There are many metals unique to Seroth, and each have various application, but then there's alum iron. Alum iron is functionally no different from normal iron, yet it bears the shine of the ambient elemental energy of wherever it was found. Originally, it was simply called elemental iron, but the name was so odd for some to say in a sentence that it was shrunken down to alum iron, making it less of a mouthful for many. Alum iron is often used in decoration, and because of that, many haven't tried to refine it into, say, a variety of steel, due to worry that it would lose that magical sheen it has. If it is used in weapons, it's usually for ceremonial weapons, as since it's still iron, it tends to be not as durable compared to steel. Heavens forbid someone dare try to use it against the scourge. Constructive criticism, when they're so short, is often just, we would like to hear more. I think the biggest thing that could use expansion here is this little sentence, and because of that, many haven't tried to refine it into, say, a variety of steel. But the world builder in me, the gut of my world builder in me at least, says that, why not? It's decorative, sure, but there's got to be a few people who have tried this because the idea of some sort of elemental steel seems like too good to pass up an attempt at. So just kind of a look at one of those attempts. I'm certain it's happened. You don't say all, you say many. And so maybe that would be my biggest thing that I felt like was missing here. But otherwise, it's a cool concept. I think, fantasy metals can be difficult to come up with if you're trying to be grounded in realism. But if you combine the magic system with them to create something sort of familiar yet new, it's a good idea. Nugget writes, Namesakes, an entry in Prometheus Society.
A bit of an entomology lesson regarding why our world is named as it is. Each of the main 5 countries in Auras is named after a metal, specifically a metal that is very common in the ground there. Titanax is titanium, Koppen is copper, Brassburn is brass, Tinwallow is tin, and Lithenheld is lithium. And finally, the continent itself is Auras, pronounced or-us, by the way, not Aureus, but I digress. Orus is taken from the word aurum, which is how gold is referenced on the periodic table. Gold is prevalent across the entire continent, and as such is used as currency. The periodic table is used to name other things too. The first 12 elements are referenced in our calendar with the months hydrane, helis, lithane, barin, boris, carbine, nitrate, oxide, fluoride, neon, sodium, and magnum. But the namesakes of the countries are not the only thing valuable found in the ground, even if many did have something to do with the proficiencies of each country. How Titanax, with its surplus of titanium, became highly militarized, or how Brassburn became the country of progress, etc. Titanax is right on top of a whole lot of oil, another reason it became so industrialized so quickly. It also has close proximity to the Arctic, though what's up there is largely unknown. Many don't make it back, and Frankenstein doesn't seem too open to share. Brassburn, similarly, is on top of a surplus of coal. It's responsible for much of the Industrial Revolution down here. I never got proper schooling, but my understanding of the history is that the amount of coal led to machines to better gather the coal. With more coal, they had more machines to make things easier, such as harvesting coal. Coal became cheaper, and there was more coal for more machines, and so on and so forth. Tinwallow is actually an extremely wealthy country, with substances such as dust, diamonds, azure, and plenty of other kinds of gems and metal, the kinds of things that are extremely valuable for many reasons, yet they do not do well at keeping their wealth. The ground there has been over-harvested within the last 50 years, and most of what's harvested has gone to Titanax ever since they won the war. Lithanel doesn't particularly like digging, probably for the best, given how reactive lithium is, but they too have something fascinating in their makeup. Unobtainium, the magnetic structure of which are responsible for the floating mountain ranges you'll find there. And Coppin doesn't have much, aside from water anyway. Most of the wealth here, aside from copper and gold, comes from trade. Except, I've never been there myself, but according to Pierre, there's a crystal cave system somewhere out there. Great arcane conduits, and currently inhabited by the Radiant Void. According to Pierre, they're a cult that worships the reflection and are not the greatest followers to have. Makes me wonder just how the reflection ended up in that mirror.
Fun little nod to Avatar with unobtainium and it being sort of this floating special anti-gravity metal kind of thing. I like that this is kind of a mishmash of a lot of stuff thrown together, but is also somehow kind of surprisingly cohesive. You do a good job with this setting, Nugget. For day 547, the prompt was, what fuels sea, land, and or space vehicles in your setting? And this comes from Kendamarania in the Discord. Bowman 5000 writes, engine cores, an entry in Seroth. When the question came for fueling vehicles, originally a burner furnace was the core of the engine, fueled by burning coal, wood, or charcoal. But this became deeply inefficient and also very heavy on environmental pollution, causing a great deal of smoke and slag buildup within the engine chamber that would inevitably end up in the environment. This was the main concern for an Onic engineer named Terron. Terron was a medium authority engineer in the Gemtech Guild of Old Loran, taught by the Onic chief Porgoris. Terron would go on to create several prototypes of what he called engine cores, an attempt at creating a power system for locomotives and other vehicles with no need for burning fuel of any kind. Initially, they all failed spectacularly. Explosions, failed experiments, everything one would expect. But in time, he managed to create a suitable engine core. Using the gemstone citrine as the core of the Gemtech component, he found its capacity to hold stability while fluctuating energy output was perfect for a vehicle's changing speeds. During the very first test, there were many fears this would simply be a delayed failure, but Terron himself was immensely hopeful as a locomotive was outfitted with the first working engine core. And it actually worked. To even Terron's amazement, it actually worked. From that moment on, even after Loran's fall, the engine core would go on to survive, used by the Loran Alliance centuries after the disaster. What is also used is Terron's other invention, the Gem Garden, allowing attendants of specific training to grow and elementally charge gemstones predominantly for use in Gemtech. I like the little history here of sort of the peering back at an attempt at utilizing coal or typical burn up a fuel and then someone's realization of let's use Gemtech for this. but it's not as cohesive as I would like, would be my biggest constructive criticism. And maybe that's just because it's short. I'm not sure. You make big jumps when we're talking invention and sort of like eureka moments. You make really big jumps when you say, and this guy just had this idea and he made it. And that can be like a little jarring, and it makes it less believable too when it's more of just this guy just came up with this. We don't have enough context maybe about Gemtech to know why he would think about using citrine. Maybe that's where the sort of abrasion is with my believability. It's still really cool, but there's something you could probably do to fill in the gaps that would make this like 10 times more believable and feel 10 times more interesting. And it's probably already there. You probably already have the world building for that to happen. It's just not here in this piece of writing. And so that is the biggest piece of critique that I would probably give. Hurricane Zane 18 writes Celestina, and I believe this is Hurricane Zane's first ever World Hammer submission. So thank you so much. Always happy to have more worlds represented here. And we'll start the proper entry now. In Celestina's current state, its inhabitants primarily use oils that can be harvested from the abominations that freely roam the planet. These oils serve many purposes, such as medicine, fuel, cooking, and trap setting. In the long distant past, the planet was mined and stripped of a vast majority of its minerals that could be used as power sources in order to develop antimatter technology, which was used to power the fleet of starships that were sent out into the great beyond of space. Lots of really good little tidbits in here. I mean, I tend to refrain from giving too much constructive criticism if an entry is this short, because I don't know if there's much I can talk about. But really, the biggest thing that I would like is just to know more. You hinted a lot of fun stuff here. Oils harvested from abominations is sort of a fascinating sentence. And then we've got a sci-fi situation going on. The idea of Celestina is a land or a world that's been largely abandoned, maybe, yet there are still some people that remain. Lots of interesting things floating around here that we don't know much about yet. Rowan the Great writes, Dawn Hammers, an entry in What Lies West. Rowan the Great notes at the top, finally an excuse to talk about some sci-fi tanks in my dark fantasy setting about Lovecraftian monsters and a very angry desert. The proper entry begins now. Only twice so far, but the first time was more than enough. That slow build-up in the room as the magic dimmed, the sparking, crying noises of something tired and mechanical waking, the roar of 1,000 soldiers as the beast woke. Dawn Hammer, Elsroy called it. Shame to find out there was more than one. Harold Green, Adventurer. Dawn hammers are automata of the West found active in either the Swallowed City or the Forlorn Graveyard, though rarely their husks can be found in other locations, like hanging from a tree in the Sorrowed Weald or half buried in the True Desert. Visibly, dawn hammers may resemble a vehicle, though examination reveals that there is no seat for occupants or drivers. Instead, the interior is full to the brim with machinery and arcane contraptions, at least in a functional or recently deactivated dawn hammer. With 3 wheels on either side, each connected to a large rotating belt, the dawn hammer is made to traverse difficult terrain with ease. Its approximate weight of 8 tons means a dawn hammer in motion stays in motion, with the automata easily capable of smashing through walls without losing any momentum. With a rectangular body, the surface of a dawn hammer made entirely of solid adamantine is incredibly resistant to impact, with most shots taken with even large caliber flintlock weapons bouncing or sliding off the hull of the automata. At the front of the construct, a single ancient elven word rests across what may have at one point been a viewport. This word is the source of the automata's name, Dawnhammer, or in the elven tongue, Daenar. Dawnhammers, rare as functional ones are, act with extreme prejudice to adventurers or any other creature that draws too near, with the exception of eldritch spawn, which the Dawnhammer completely ignores. When aggressing, a Dawnhammer will use a vast array of weaponry to dispatch their targets. Their primary form of attack comes from a highly advanced firearm capable of rapidly firing off bullets in a near-perfect trajectory, with zero recoil affecting the firearm within. This turret is housed near the empty viewport of the machine, and with enough firepower may be disabled, though eventually the turret will run out of ammo. Harold Green, the first to encounter a Dawnhammer with his party, reported that as they took cover and repeatedly peeked to spot the Dawnhammer, it took roughly 3 minutes of sustained fire to deplete the munitions within. Among other lesser offensive options, a Dawnhammer possesses a weapon of extreme destruction on a rotating platform above its body. This large cannon fires massive, highly explosive projectiles that can easily kill an adventurer in under a second, with little to no parts of the person's body remaining after impact. Though it's better to say that the rounds simply rip apart a target with a direct hit, than explode after hitting something more solid. Out of the 8 reported encounters with the Dawnhammer, only 2 have ever used their cannon, suggesting either mechanical failure is at play, or the automata do not possess the munitions to fire after such a long time inactive. 5 of the 8 Dawnhammers were rendered immobile before awakening, and 3 were in near-perfect condition, though only one of those 3 ever fired its main cannon. After their second encounter with the Dawnhammer, adventurer Harold Green made a great effort to bring the chassis back to the City of Worms, an effort he succeeded in. Examination was conducted by yours truly, and after picking apart at its insides, I have much to report. My primary finding was that the Dawnhammer possessed a worn-down vocal crystal, which for once actually had audible segments to the entire recording. Set grooves meant that the automata could play key phrases and certain context words used to communicate with something. I would assume that these machines served as some kind of commander for other automata or even living soldiers at the time they were used. The only phrases from the vocal crystal I can parse are enemy and cover, flank, left, right, charge, cast, and retreat, all in ancient Elven, of course, though luckily I am fluent. The second finding was its fuel, a large cylinder within it spun by combustion, which turns a device that draws in local mana, powering a storm battery. This combustion only serves to kickstart the process and will stop functioning once a certain percentage of mana has been gathered, detected, of course, through highly complex machinery. Most other automata we see within the West are much, much simpler than this. I don't think I could ever reverse engineer anything like a Dawnhammer if you gave me another 1,000 years of life, but things like metal skeletons and even colossi could theoretically be made again if we had the resources. Hell, Seamus has a metal skeleton that guards his pantry. This mana engine contraption is immeasurably complex. However it was designed in the first place is a mystery in and of itself. My final notable finding is that the components responsible for target acquisition are labeled as See the Faithful, Purge the Devoted. I can only assume that we as mortals are targeted out of error, or perhaps it searches for a certain article of clothing, a badge, or perhaps heraldry that belongs to friendliness. The machine may have been accompanied with. I must say that these discoveries give potential context to the nature of the final days experienced by the old Empire of the West, or perhaps the final years. We don't know how fast the so-called apocalypse was. It could have been a centuries-long struggle, or it could have been mere hours. This history is still our history. These are Elven words, and whether or not it was my great-great-great-grandfather or 1,000 grandfathers before him who stood in the old empire as a citizen and not an explorer, I remain determined to know my past. In combat against a Dawnhammer, mobility is key. Keeping away from the automata's front and avoiding the turret will allow you to deal blows to the wheel structures and eventually break open the hatch on top and deal a devastating blow to the internal machinery. Pyromancy spells will weaken the armor greatly and allow normal strikes to pierce through. Dawnhammers do not have a place in the ecosystem as automata and only serve to disrupt it. Avoid them if you can, act with cunning if you cannot. This is a harder one for me to give constructive criticism to because I really like this one. You've done a great job of explaining and describing a tank with a fantasy combustion engine in a way that sounds like someone who doesn't know what a tank is. I mean, you've really delivered on what I assume was your kind of primary goal here, which was a tank without saying it's a tank with a turret and treads. You've done a great job with that. I think you've also done some interesting stuff that hinting at the fact that our writer here, our narrator, our scholar, has sort of elven heritage, or maybe is an elf in this description at the end here, like the third to last paragraph at the end of it, which I thought was really interesting. In terms of constructive criticism, I think all I can tell you is that like there's a few spots I could use a little bit of an edit. This sentence right here, I think, is maybe the roughest sentence, and I think I know what you're trying to get at, but it could use some reworking. But man, otherwise, just a great job, Pred. I always enjoy your stuff, and What Lies West is really turning out to be something kind of amazing, I think. Kendamarania writes, Animal Locomotives, an entry in Return to Faelund. In the waning years of the long fog, the talking animals created a vast and expansive rail network never before seen in Faelund. Previous modes of transportation, such as by ghost ship or by horseback, couldn't compete with the speed of their combustible train engines that emitted pink steam. The talking animals always seemed to be ahead of the rest of Faelun technologically, while the elves, mermaids, snurgs, and wisps seemed to be stuck in the equivalent of the High Middle Ages. The talking animals had access to early steam trains and goods that seemed to be mass-produced, which seemed impossible by their scattered populace. In reality, many of the animal traders were partners with the witches, who had access to various raw metals and latent dwarfen technology in the Chroma Mountains. Because witch society was flourishing so well during the long fog due to advancements in medicine and infrastructure thanks to the abusive combination of science and magic, they had plenty of surplus resources and goods to give out to anyone willing to barter knowledge. They also created the first blueprints for a steam turbine, done through heating water through stones that rapidly changed transformation through magic, producing heat. The talking animals were the first to take their offer, connecting their disparate societies together, with some crossing the northern wastes and trekking into the unknown of Greater Faelund. This is kind of interesting. We're almost getting some fun return to Faelund political webs here in how the animals almost morally bankrupt themselves by going to the witches for effectively manufactured goods and improved technology. Kind of an interesting thing that's being played with here. The Wanderer writes, fission, fusion, antimatter, so many options, an entry in Forest Kingdom. Vesparia gave a twirl as she entered the large hall. Despite being arguably one of the best pilots in the galaxy, and being one of the most decorated individuals in the Star Brigade, she couldn't help but feel like a giddy 16-year-old girl again. She was at the Great Ur Fly-In, 4 days early, sure, but there, thousands of starships are here already, all showing off their interiors, custom work done in them, and various vintage and historical ones. For someone who adored getting their hands dirty in the repairs and mods of her own ship, this was paradise. Not to mention, she thought with a wide grin, shops. This wasn't just a vacation visit, though she would have been here anyways. She was actually looking to buy a new engine. The last one had been burned through beyond repair in a risky stunt with some pirates in a black hole, and she had enough credits to purchase a very nice replacement. She was quite wealthy, after all. Well, should be. Her crew was wealthy, and she could have retired 1,000 times over quite comfortably, except she spent nearly all of her credits on keeping the Outcast in tip-top shape. A ship as sexy as her own couldn't do with cheap parts and subpar labor. No, Vesparia might put her through the ringer, but her beauty wouldn't substitute for anything but the best, and the best cost so very much. She made her way over to Adelaide's workshop. Adelaide was a shrewd and intimidating engineer. If she didn't know her well, you'd think she was a right old jerk. She did, of course, say mean things, and you'd need a tough skin to get along with her, but her actions spoke volumes louder than her words, and they were quite gentle and nice actions. Plus, she spoke the same language as Vesparia. Talent. Talent and care for their craft. Adelaide was the one other person who cared about the Outcast nearly as much as Vesparia, and her work showed it. Vesparia always cringed when she was forced to take it into someone else to get work done on it. She could handle all the minor repairs and maintenance herself, but sometimes a workshop was essential. She always took it into Adelaide afterwards for a proper repair, readying for the scolding of allowing inferior hands to work on it and the fee. Adelaide had steep prices, after all, but the quality more than made up for it. Though as for parts, Adelaide specialized in quality work. Vesparia was distracted. One of the ships present had a V1 127 quad-chamber engine. They'd only ever made 120 of them, a vintage engine for sure, but it was a very reliable and masterfully powerful one. They apparently had a bad habit of collapsing after a few light years and were recalled, but the fix for it, if you knew it needed it, had been public for nearly a decade. Sadly, there was a not-for-sale sign present, and it was written in rigid, so it was genuine. She might have bought it right there otherwise, if not for a strong sense of discipline and self-control. She talked to the owner for a bit, complimented their engine, and moved on to Adelaide's shop. It was like she had ascended to a higher level of paradise. All around her were various engine types. Adelaide even had some fission reactors. The atomic blue glow from the reactor pools was beyond gorgeous, though these engines were more used for vintage spacecraft and the fuel was more expensive for about the same or lower quality. No, these were used for fancy, old, or emergency generators. Even depleted, they could keep the life support systems on for centuries. Probably. It hadn't been long enough to see any of them properly go out. She'd get a backup generator as one. The fusion reactors were much more Vesparia's pace. They were, on average, 20 to 30 times stronger, and their fuel was the most abundant material in the galaxy. They were easy run, ran smoothly, and the waste product of the fuel was recyclable into a 3D modulator that could make any shape out of chromium, very useful for trinkets. They were the gold standard for engines for a reason. Practically free fuel, only marginally more complicated engines, and a lot of power both for the ship and thrusters. It was the most likely option for her, except perhaps the antimatter engines. Now those were powerful. A single antimatter engine could easily outpace 4 to 6 fusion engines. Energy cannot be produced more efficiently than with antimatter after all. Of course, most of the high-end engines like the Outcast's current damaged one used antimatter as an accelerant for when you really needed to pull into high gear. But these engines were constantly high gear. They were perfect for very large, powerful, heavy ships, very fast maneuvering ones, large blasters, and the fabulously richest luxury ship. There was the problem of scarcity, though. Antimatter wasn't a common resource and cost about 10 credits per milligram, and they couldn't use lesser fuel sources in a pinch like fusion either. No, Vesparia thought, too much risk for the reward. I'll just get a larger emergency reserve. She perused a few more options. There was a few biogenerators, a historical oil generator, a battery-powered ship engine, and then she spotted it. A full-point generator. When she got her medal for defending 4 passenger carriers against 12 pirate ships, she had been gifted a full-point pistol. That pistol, with virtually zero recoil, could hit as hard as one of her ship's cannons. She wasn't fully sure how they worked. She knew it was fusion-powered, but nearing 100% efficiency. Compared to other engines, they were practically a perpetual motion machine. They were about a dozen times stronger than their fusion counterparts, but a tiny fraction of the noise, much smoother, she heard, and a maneuvering dream. She had to have it. She checked the price, checked it again, and started doing the math. She wouldn't have an income for a year or two, only the ship repair and maintenance fees and her crew's paychecks. Her entire retirement plan would also go out the window. Again. But she had the credits for it. She approached Adelaide, ready to ask before any commitments were made. Say, Adelaide, how in the cosmos did you get an engine like this?
Veshpilash, the obvious question, yes. I get it from the Forest Kingdom, see? They're selling out some of their here's stockpiles. Fitting out their fleets with something newer, yes. Word around is that they've made a better version, yes. Selling out the older ones, yes. Don't think that I didn't find ways to improve their craftsmanship, though, see? This one be one of the 50 in the Forest Kingdom itself. Mighty good ship that one is, yes?
Vesparia agreed. It did make sense. Why else would a full-point engine be anywhere? She hadn't told her crew, not wanting to brag, but that pistol of hers was worth the cost of some ships. A full engine of one would be unimaginably expensive unless someone was getting rid of them in mass. Still, though, she was currently quite the wealthy individual, and it would still bleed her dry. After haggling for a minute, Adelaide loved haggling, even if she did follow the reverse system of the Trugans, where they gave a lower price and you were expected to raise the price rather than lowering it. Usually, Vesparia would subtly let her actual funds for it show, letting a quiet arrangement be made without ruining the game, but she also didn't want to cheat Adelaide out of a priceless engine by making her feel too guilty. Maybe if it went a little too high, but she wanted to keep a good thing good without adding that to the table, and thankfully, it didn't come to it. Adelaide might be shrewd and calculating and a bit pricey, but she is honest when it comes to her prices. And so a bargain was struck. 3.5 days later, after the new repairs were done, Vesparia got in her cockpit again, ran a test flight, and had the smoothest yet high acceleration ride in her life. It was well worth it. She returned for the fly-in, of course, beaming and willing to talk specs with anyone who wanted to for the next 7 days, which was enough to make her stir-crazy wanting to fire the thing up again. Fun. You've got a lot of cool little technologies here, lots of fun sort of MacGuffin-y things that work great for sort of sci-fantasy, the way that Forest Kingdom is, where you just sort of have, 0 point and antimatter and all these things that don't necessarily need to be explained. They give you this fantastical sci-fi idea of what this thing is capable of, and it's just better than the thing before it. Fission, fusion, everything. It's a lot of fun. It's a great little scene that you've put together here with some exposition that is well injected so that it doesn't feel like an exposition-based entry. For day 548, the prompt was, who is the strongest person in your world? And this comes from EclipsEternal in the Discord. Bulbin 5000 writes, the Grim Patriarch, an entry in Seraph. As he sat upon his throne, he grinned as he realized just what to do with his demented creation. The grim patriarch stood from his throne and reached into the darkness of the scourge, every soul therein forced around his fingers like a river along spires of stone. He pulled the light-skinned of humanity and corroded them, forms of ancient conquests and generational bloodlust rising from his realm of blight. Go, conquer Seroth's children, leave naught but blood and ash. To the dark-skinned he tugged upon chains most ancient, cackling with delight as forms of enslavement and decay rose from the dark. Yield unto your new masters and choke the hopes of Seroth. Then the workers of the capitalist empires, broken neath its weight, and now broken further neath the patriarch's rule, let the whir of the very machines you used to be the last sound those whelps hear. Then he turned and witnessed those who serve him, the violators, defilers, and desecrators, those who ruined women and youth alike, as they called for orders from their grim master. Go and eradicate them, the lives of the weak, the innocent, of those who survive. Go and take what you will to destroy them. As he roared his command, only then did his cult charge onto the world of Seroth to continue their god's conquest. And so did the patriarch enact the next step of his scheme. From his cruelty did he craft his angels, as forms of caricature and monstrosities of villainy rose from his shadows. Then, from his hate for her, freedom did he make his despoilers to rot Seroth's magic and soul from within. Then, from his ambition did he make his titans to desecrate and destroy Seroth's world. And so, when the final day of his machinations passed, his servants unleashed, he returned to his throne, confident he had already won. So much so, he didn't even bother to heal his wounds from his battle with Seroth. Little did he realize just how vast the consequences his servant's mistake would be, as 8 little lives stand against his eternal nightmare. That was a fun one. I liked the old mythology feel. I think my only constructive criticism is that there's a couple spots, like at the end, where I feel like we lose that a little bit. This kind of exposition that feels like I'm reading from an ancient text or something was really cool, but it wasn't all the way consistent. Maybe that would be like my only real note, but otherwise I really enjoyed this read a lot. Got some really cool stuff going on here. EclipsEternal writes, Starlight, the Ruthless, an entry in Shattered Tale, Vesper, Act 1. Iris can be heard from the other room. Hey, Vesper, tune into the Coliseum match. I heard it's supposed to be a brutal one tonight. We thank you all for coming out tonight, but before you leave, we have one last event. I present to you the challenger who hails from the south. He has slowly climbed his way through the ranks to be here tonight, and his competition is our reigning champion. You know him. You love him. I give you Starlight the Ruthless. Slowly walking out of the gate is a man wearing a mask with a moon over one eye and the sun over the other. The mask looks warped and damaged, and there is a hint of insanity in the eyes. Hey, Iris, isn't that Dad? When did he become the champion? Iris runs into the room to see what's happening. With a pained voice, he finally speaks. That's not Dad. At least not anymore. Vesper, open a gate. I'm bringing Dad home. But there is no way you can beat a corrupted member of the Masquerade. You could barely match him in training, and you think you can knock sense into him. Vesper, I said open a gate. I will not ask again. Anyways, the Colosseum never cared about a fair fight anyways. Iris disappears down the elevator before the power flickers for a moment. The ticking of a clockwork gears can be heard from deep within the manor. Iris returns not too much later with a construct at his side. There is a glow of ichor echoing out of its eyes. You didn't. You know how unstable ichor is. Which is why I'm not using the ichor myself. Should be enough to tip the scales in my favor. Now open a gate. Iris steps through the gate as Vesper watches the TV. Iris forces the challenger to forfeit the match and challenges Starlight under a made-up title of the Scholar of Mechanus. What follows is a brutal fight. Iris barely survives it after losing an eye. Starlight won the fight and left in disappointment. The construct was destroyed, and Iris salvaged its core. Unfortunately, the core was poisoned by the ichor. Pretty interesting stuff here. My constructive criticism would mostly be this just feels like a first draft, I think. So, biggest thing is just some little edits here. There's some repetitive wording, some descriptions that fall a little flat or don't make sense, or some little tenses that kind of conflict with each other that just make the reading feel a little clunky in a couple spaces. And then at the end, I totally get what's going on at the end here, which is sort of a summation of what you would actually be writing. But it is pretty difficult to track. I had to kind of read back over it a couple times before I even talked about it, just to get an idea for sure that I kind of knew what was going on and what the outcome had been and what I was supposed to kind of feel. So that's the best I can give. Obviously, plenty of that is really just due to, I'm assuming, the first draft's kind of scenario for most works that go into World Hammer. So take it all with a grain of salt, but that's what I noticed. Nugget writes, The Archivist and the Father of Monsters, an entry in Prometheus.
Strongest person in Aureus. It's a constant tie between the Father of Monsters and the Archivist, comparing dick sizes from opposite sides of the continent, really. The two most powerful weavers in this reality, and two that infamously do not get along. And from their locations in Petrichor, Brassburn, and Scrapmore, Tinwallow, they really can't get much further away from each other. The Archivist is a weaver I am all too familiar with, unfortunately, and if you're listening to these tapes, he should be familiar to you as well. I was introduced to him with the name of... I don't know much about him from before, aside from that he owned a bookshop, and that he enjoyed the stars and supposedly pot. Not that any of that really matters now. Today he is known as the Archivist. He has an institute called the Library of Argus, referencing a far older face of his, most likely. He is certainly extremely powerful, but that overload is beginning to creep in on him. The Father of Monsters I have less of a tab on. Makes sense, as the two are rivals. I can't exactly see him. What I do know is that his current face is a man formerly known as Dr. Mortatius Assa. He was a doctor at Stonehaven for some time, about 50 years ago, mainly studying lycanthropy. According to records, he left on a research trip to Tinwallow and never returned. Evidently, he ran into the inventor of the curse he strives so desperately to cure, and in doing so ended up becoming one with her. Whether by choice or by accident remains unknown. As with most weavers, he seems to be staying with something resembling his old day job as a doctor in Tinwallow. One who claims to have a remedy to cure all ails, but something tells me he enjoys his curses too fondly to ever think of permanently curing them. It's an odd, one-sided custody situation. I both work for the Archivist, but am marked by the Father. All the while, I want nothing to do with either.
Interesting. I'm reading a few things out of order because some things were posted late, this being one of them. Not late in terms of cutoff, but just late into when I begin to do the recordings. And so it's cool to get to see the Archivist that we mostly hear discuss the person whose actual moniker is the Archivist, and then see something from the Archivist later on. I think that's later on. I think it's after this day. I am a little unsure about the order of things, but we get all the context in this one episode, which is very cool. For day 549, the prompt was, what are some species of fauna that are adapted to survive extreme conditions in your world? And this comes from Kendamarania in the Discord. Kendamarania writes, hellhounds and marrowworms, an entry in City of Well. Hellhounds are a very common sight in Corpi, especially around Gluttony. They were originally found in the subpolar region of Hell, where they adapted to the extreme cold through layers of blubber and thick, rough fur that kept them warm. They were also ambush predators with hook-like canines meant to latch onto their prey. Pre-fall demons domesticated them thousands of years before Lucifer's reign, spreading all throughout Hell. By the 1940s, they resemble little of what they were in the wild, losing nearly a third of their body mass from moving to warmer temperatures. In Corpi, they're used often in a punishment of gluttony, where indulgent sinners writhe in the ground while hellhounds tear apart their flesh. Marrowworms are a separate species of invertebrates introduced to hellhounds by demons from the arid regions of Hell. They hang around in the dog's gums and teeth and are able to drill holes to get into their main source of diet, bone marrow. The two species have a commensal symbiosis, as the marrowworms benefit from the carnivores' diets of hellhounds, while the hellhounds themselves do not benefit from them. Marrow worms are typically introduced to help hellhounds digest human bodies and reduce waste left by the human skeleton. Ugh, this one is pretty freaky, but kind of compelling. I like the idea here. Really nasty, but super interesting. And it is totally something I can see a 1940s, ingenuitous person being like, well, I say, if we put this in this dog's gums and then he eats a person, then the person's body decays faster or something. So it definitely feels right. Pro in the Great writes, Voltaic Seekers, an entry in What Lies West. Pro in the Great notes at the top, the single most alien-looking plant ever. I really want to draw this one out, as the image in my head I have is just so weird. The proper entry begins now. They scare me a bit, if I'm to be honest. They're so tall, so spindly, so conscious. If any plant in the West was closest to enlightenment, it would be one of those gray-petaled, freakish trees. Cask, Waystalk, Adventurer. Voltaic seekers, or as we simply call them seekers, are massive floral specimens found within the voltaic monolith's domain. As manivores, seekers earn a great deal of their energy by attracting electromancy via their Vermaus pattern, a series of repeating, square shapes that endlessly loop over each other. Without sunlight or water, voltaic seekers are liable to be small to conserve energy, or at least one would suspect such a thing. Seekers instead opt to dominate the skyline and grow as much surface area as possible, with massive gills like those of a fungi growing up the stalk of the plant's nearly 30-foot tall adult size. Whereas other manivores within the monolith's range of power stay small to conserve their precious energy, the Seeker defies this standard to dominate the skies with massive canopies. With the frequent and instantaneous movement of the voltaic monolith between lightning strikes, Seekers earn their namesakes for turning to face the monolith between massive bolts that conceal its movement. Electromancy's actions against physical space are little understood to this day, but seemingly, the Seeker knows enough to predict the next location the monolith will teleport to. The Vermaus pattern on the Seeker is incredibly refined as well, with the pattern's smallest points being roughly 0.23 inches across instead of other plants' 1-inch minimum gaps. The plant even fills up the space between the larger patterns with more smaller patterns, an otherwise unseen utilization of space in other manivoring plants. The Seeker's size lends to their further development, as some ancient specimens reach titanic sizes that rival even the weeping titans of the Sorrowed Weald. With large specimens, the plants will even begin dragging metal scraps up their trunk and putting the pieces onto their tip, drawing in lightning for them to consume. Though this process can take weeks, as the only true mobile part of a Seeker is its face. The face of a Seeker is a large, flat, circular surface like that of a sunflower. In fact, I would say it's possible that at one point the Seekers were sunflowers, or another similar plant. At the very least, this face holds some kind of crude vision system, allowing the Seeker to see and respond to the flashes coming from the voltaic monolith, being the most likely tool from which the Seeker determines the next location the monolith will appear. This face will also move to track the movement of close, electromancy specializing mages. This has given the plants a reputation of stalking adventurers, though obviously it is merely the manivore's inner mechanisms directing the movement and not any sort of consciousness. Finally, the matter of territorial fights. As strange as that sounds, it's true. Voltaic Seekers are territorial. With their roots, Seekers slowly move throughout the region they call home. Scholars believe this behavior is to avoid distant warps from the voltaic monolith, predicting upwards of 1,000 or so jumps, and acting accordingly and avoiding being crushed when the monolith suddenly occupies their space, a phenomenon called violent repositioning trauma, or simply VRT. During this time, if two or more Seekers cross paths, they will engage in violent combat between one another, conducting massive amounts of energy to their face and firing it off in short beams of electric wrath. The Seeker with higher reserves usually overloads their competitor, resulting in a violent blue explosion as the natural storm battery combusts. This same mechanism is susceptible to mortal detonation as well, with at least 2 recorded tragedies when adventurers tried to cut down a Seeker for profit, only for the internal energy to rapidly and violently release. The leaves of a Seeker are edible and make for good tea or other herbal cuisine when steeped. Ratfolk alone are capable of processing their densely starched tubers grown in their root structures. Really fascinating concept. I am imagining big sunflower-like things, but it would be really cool to see the actual depiction that Prewin has in his mind about these things, because they are fascinating. This one was harder for me to give constructive criticism on. Like I've said before, I can't spend too long on any one thing, and so for this one, there was not much that I noticed. I just really liked it. Predwin has gotten really consistent. I think your prose Predwin is really consistently solid enough that it's harder for me to give in the moment critique unless it is something really feels missing. But I would say that this one that is not the case. For day 550, the prompt was, what materials are seen as wealthy, like gold and silver IRL? What reasons, properties, or origins are there for such associations? And this comes from Alex in the Discord. Bulbman 5000 writes, Gorge Gold, an entry in Seroth. Seroth has many materials that have changed in one way or another, yet few left those who discovered it as slack-jawed as Gorge Gold did. Gorge Gold is a special variety of gold touched by a great deal of darkness energies, usually found in deep caverns or in the incredibly deep Ankrum Gorge that it was initially found in. Gorge Gold is a mostly black metal, with the gold itself appearing as speckles, like stars in the sky. It's often considered one of the more gorgeous metals amongst the materials changed by magics. It is seen as a symbol of wealth and power, due predominantly to how hard it is to get, or at least it was. As civilizations fell, and the scourge encroached, the idea of Gorge Gold being used as a showcase of wealth was culturally abandoned. Now, only the foolhardy and, quite frankly, stupid try to actively hunt for Gorge Gold, especially in the Ankrum Gorge, where but one door to the nexus of Earth dwells. I feel like both the thing I'm interested in, that I would comment normally, and my constructive criticism for Bulbman in this case, would be that I still have an uncertainty in what the Seroth landscape culturally really looks like. Because this discussion here implies a real and truly total collapse of civilization, because that is really the only time in which rare and non-tarnishing materials like gold, especially in a medievally inspired world, ever lose their value. But there have been other things that have been written that sound like there is still pockets of civilization. So I'm curious about kind of where the balance is. I think that this could have used more explanation as to what is going on culturally that would really truly cause an abandonment of this as being a showcase of wealth. Did civilization truly fall? And maybe I just haven't caught on well enough to the fact that it is truly post-apocalyptic. It sounds like it, but there's elements that just seem like there's big pockets of civilization still. Not sure if maybe that's my own interpretive failing. That is the struggle of all forms of communication, but that is my 2 cents, whatever. For day 551, the prompt was, has there been any successful attempts of reanimating the dead in your world, whether using magic or technology? And this comes from Kendamarania in the Discord. Ed/Music Geekery writes, just this once, everybody lives. In Daystara, raising the dead is a complicated matter. Whilst there are many magics that exist which permit for such actions, whether or not the work is a decision left to the gods themselves, the god Nicarus is by and large a dispassionate and impartial judge of the matters of life and death, but if he personally feels that his servant Caenaris, the Lady of the Winds of Death, has collected a soul before their time, or on select occasions he has been impressed by the case that a soul makes for being allowed to return, he will allow the gates of the afterlife to be reopened and the soul to return to their original form. However, there was one particular occasion when it was not simply a bid from mortals to the gods, and it is that occasion which we concern ourselves with here. The wars against the Abrelain were devastating and far-reaching. Thousands had been slain in the wars, many of them just innocent people caught in the crossfire or otherwise treated as fodder for the Abrelain Empire's war machine. Others were just brave souls who wanted to fight for freedom and protection of their families. In the face of this, a cleric of Nesdieth, the god of hope, went in search of a way to bring back all those lost souls whose lives had been cut short. He spoke to the ancient circle of Maltho, for they had tended many of the ailing and wounded. He traveled far and wide with many different clerics and druids of Delmora, and he sought out the triumvir of Gideon, an order of magi well versed in healing magics. Finally, he spent 17 days praying to Nasdieth, hoping that he might be granted a boon he had been searching for. On the 17th day, he bore witness to the angel Alpaida, the calming blue radiance of her light washing over him and soothing his troubled heart. He handed the cleric a small box crafted of the most brilliant sapphire. She told him, Should he take this box to the top of the mountain Tandia and speak the words Re Hisana Iutreva, then it would grant all with healing hands the power to do greater than has ever been seen before. He undertook the solar's guidance and sojourned to the forbidding mountain range of Kamsidra, defying all threats of death to reach the peak of Tandia, held aloft the box and spoke the words as guided. He was bathed in a brilliant blue light, and he spread his hands. He bellowed with an almighty defiance. Just this once! Everybody lives! And the blue light extended from his hands across the continent. So many whose lives had been cut short found themselves renewed. The weak and ailing were restored, the old and infirm renewed, the priest had succeeded in his goal. This spell, and many much more minor examples, do still exist in Daystara, the most commonly known ones being Raise Dead and Resurrection, but all take their toll on the caster's body. The spell discussed here ages the caster by several years and renders them comatose for 2 full weeks. Lesser spells still tax the body to a degree through aging and exhaustion, but none so greatly as the spell simply dubbed, Just This Once, Everybody Lives. Cool combination and sort of synthesis between general exposition and kind of mythology fairy tale going on here, which I liked a lot. Kind of, fun little journey of an individual finding a problem, trying to solve it, and getting to the top. You can imagine a longer bardic-like story of the travails that he would have had to get through. But it was fun to read that and sort of imagine the in-world truth of this situation. EclipsEternal writes, Iris Protocol, an entry in Shattered Tale number 5, Hota. Protocol is a Soulforge construct. It has been the host for several construct titles throughout the series, but while the construct is called Protocol, the Iris Protocol is a failsafe program. It stands for Irregular Response in System, and it was meant to trigger upon Iris's death. However, the construct never had a strong enough core to house a soul. Because of this, the protocol never triggered. You can fail this ending in Hoda by trying it too early, in which case you would receive the discarded ending instead. But by waiting for long enough, the construct is powered by the Kingdom's Heart, and for the first time in its entire lifespan becomes fully operational. Successfully activating the Iris Protocol will grant you the Machine Soul ending, and will set another piece in place to start the Cursed King's crusade. Kind of cool. A little choose your own adventure, which I think EclipsEternal has talked about before, which is neat. I honestly, constructive criticism, I don't have a lot for this because it's so short, and really, I was just left sort of wanting to know a little bit more about the actual format for Shattered Tale number 5, Hota. Is it a choose your own adventure, or is the plan for it to be more visual novel, choose your own adventure? Is this a digital experience? Is it a physical experience? I'm kind of curious. Perwin the Great writes, The Risen Ones, and Perwin captions this post with skeleton shield bash sound effect.
Sun's scourges pawns, they say. Perchance they may be correct. Then we will sneak into your homes and slit your throats, for it is our deepest need. That we may blow out your torch on a dark road and drag you away into the night howling in pain. But I raise you a different question of motives. If we were made to kill, then why reanimate us so weak of will and confused? I don't know who I was, who my family could have been. I rose from an unmarked grave on the hillside of a backwater abandoned city long after its denizens had considered the calling. I rose alone. I live alone. I sleep alone. I am alone. And yet I am content. We all are. The risen ones crave solitude and wish not for bloodshed. So then I ask you, if we were made to kill, why not make us better at it.
Krell of Thousand Steps, Risen Human Hand. The Risen Ones are an unfortunate people, I gather. In all their history, they have been dejected, turned away, and forbidden entry. They have rarely ever been welcome, with, to my knowledge, only one city holding a great deal of tolerance, being, of course, the City of Worms. The Risen Ones suffer a unique origin, with the unfeathering being the source of their animacy. When the very first unfeathering rung out across Miernos, its calling was so powerful it clenched the souls of the dead and pulled them back into their mortal shells. Peasants, vicars, kings, none were too weak or too strong of will to be spared. Risen Ones possess no memory of their time alive, nor do they hold any memories of beyond the gate, the slang term used to describe the afterlife, of course. Depending on where they surface and when, a Risen One may face many or few trials, of which I have some examples. The dwarves revere the old ways, and the ones who orchestrated them. Many dwarven Risen Ones are not vilified, and are instead treated as pieces of holy work, with even the sons of Yrzrold holding their tongue in the presence of an ancient dwarven lord made flesh again. Still, with their memories long gone, a great deal of even the most ancient dwarven lords and ladies leave their holds and journey west to answer the call occidental, as despite all the love, they still feel as if they do not belong. Humanity as a whole has feared the undead, even before they knew for a fact that they really truly existed. When the Risen Ones appeared, they were often burned at the stake or shattered to pieces with mauls and hammers. It took examples from both the dwarves and the eastern hands of Ragnaros to hammer home that the Risen Ones are simply people without flesh, but the damage was done, and it was deep. Newborn Risen Ones are taught by their elders that humans are scared creatures that would sooner strike a skeleton down rather than speak with them. As such, many Risen Ones avoid human majority cities like Luminark and Three Purses. The eastern nations, governed by lizard folk, centaurs, cat folk, and the Hand of Ragnaros, all from the start treated the Risen Ones with a deal of respect, if not out of reverence like the Kalisk, then out of fear or taboo like the cat folk and hands. The centaurs specifically seemed to just go on with business as usual, only with skeletal companions riding alongside them as they charged down mighty bisons and boars. The Hands of Ragnaros believe that becoming risen is punishment from their goddess, or rather an opportunity to earn her favor once more. Risen hands will keep their mark upon their bicep, or rather where their bicep was, meaning that despite the mind forgetting origins, the soul does not. The catfolk treat their risen with pity rather than reverence or fear. They are saddened by their amnesiac state and lack of culture despite being from such a powerfully spoken peoples. They are more mortally driven catfolk who see the existence of the risen as a truth that death strips away all that is you, and that you merely join the faceless masses in a place of dull reality forever. A sinister thought, to say the least. The elves all have had very conflicting views on the Risen Ones, with the so-called High Elves of Moradesh purging them en masse, a fact of my history I am not proud of, as I personally hunted down some when we were still befuddled as to their origins and motives. This resulted in a similar situation with elves and the Risen as with humanity and the Risen. The Woodborn and the Marked Ones both acted without much care to their Risen companions. The Marked Ones already act with solitude, so the Risen Ones found solace within their hidden citadel. The Woodborn usually cannibalized their dead, and the few bones left out in the wilderness that animated simply went west, as there was nobody around to guide them back home. Cresthorans, in particular, do not like Risen Ones, as they resemble creatures from their folklore, which you can be sure the Cresthorans are very attached to within their culture. Risen Ones are turned away at constant, vilified and blamed for crimes they had no possibility of committing. The Gravewalkers, a coalition of risen terrorists and cultists, have origins from Cresthoran neglect and violence, with their leader once being a legendary Jarl, who, of course, lost his memories, but delved into his history and learned of the power he should have wielded even after death. After a brief conflict, the Gravewalkers fled to Balfora, where they now plan their dastardly plot. You know what they say about Cresthorans. You can't teach them anything. As of yet, no risen minotaurs, goblins, kobolds, or ratfolk have made an appearance. With time, I'm sure it is inevitable, but I'm sure that they'll receive a warmer welcome than their cousins did. The Risen Ones have adopted pieces of other cultures and come together to make their own. While I haven't personally had any dealings with the Risen One, I am told that they prefer to keep to themselves and rarely deal with outsiders. The older a Risen's corpse was before waking, the less emotion they have, with particularly old Risen Ones acting with a cold precision, as they hold no empathy or joy in their hearts. In my own opinion, the Risen Ones should be cured of their condition in the correct way, by ending the spell over them and allowing them to rest once more with a fulfilled purpose. Such a duty may prove difficult and will require a great deal of effort answering their own question. What lies west? Okay, cool. We've heard of the Risen Ones before. Nice to get a really thorough document on them and the reactions of each of the cultures and some of the philosophy interpretations by those cultures based on this new information of people that come back from the afterlife, have no memory of it, is kind of harrowing. I think this also just suffers a little bit from a first edit. The vast majority of the prose is perfectly fine, but there's a few places where the wrong tense of a word is used. We've used en masse instead of en masse once again, but really, really tough to critique this one as well because it covered all the bases that I felt like it should have covered. zytgianraven writes, Trial of a Reanimator. Now, this is a PDF, and hopefully this comes across well visually. To those of you just listening, should be fine, and I also believe this is zytgianraven's first time in World Hammer, which is exciting, and this is looking to be quite the doozy of an entry. A transcription of the sentencing of former head mage Harrow Spellrot, penned by Grand Scribe Leola Inkward. Date: Inferior Sun 1287, Toll Frost, Sidus 64. Location: Ars Magica Institute, Holding Unit Amphitheater. Presiding Imperator. Imperator Madeline Highcaller. The accused, Head Mage Harrow Spellrot. Others present: Imperator Various Stormrider, Imperator Sigmund, Skytide, Imperator Lucian Ironhand, Magister Diane Runeward, Magister Ruby Cinderstorm, Magister Raymond Skytide, Magister Sorrel Lighthammer, King Thorian Goldenhelm, Princess Azul Goldenhelm, Grand Inquisitor Talon Silversight. Madeline Highcaller. Very well then, Harrow. Lady Leola, begin your record, please. Leola Inkward. Yes, Madam Imperator, I have begun the record. You may proceed at your leisure. Madeline Highcaller. Harrow Spellrot, you stand before the Imperator Council having confessed to one account of treason, several counts of vandalism of state property, theft of state property, mass homicide, concealment of crime, and the desecration of the corpse of Sky Warden Aureus Blackwood. Is this correct? Harrow Spellrot. Madam Imperator, I don't believe I have committed any treason at all. My efforts during the hallowed study were only for the benefit of Amberley. Madeline Highcaller. Have you admitted to the charges, Spellrot? Harrow Spellrot. Yes, Madam Imperator. Madeline Highcaller. Lady Diane, please read the report you've compiled for this council. Diane Runeward. Yes, Madam Imperator, on the night of Superior Sun 1287 Arc Light Lunae 22, unauthorized experiments done by one Harrow Spellrot were discovered when a hallowed broke free of its containment underneath the research wing and begun attacking the residents of the Institute Harrow Spellrot. Rex didn't harm the people of the Institute. He was only acting in Thorian Goldenhelm. You named it? Harrow Spellrot. He named himself. It's not perfect yet, but please, Madam Imperator, I put life back into that boy's lungs. I can... Madeline Highcaller. Be silent. Lady Diane, continue. Diane Runeward. While Arcane Legion Auhminous, aided by Imperial host sentries and Sky Wardens stationed at the Institute as security, were able to drive the escaped Hollowed from the grounds of the Ars Magica Institute, it still remains within the borders of Amberlin. The Imperator Council was made aware of the presence of a Hollowed within Amberlin, and Inquisitors were sent to investigate these events. Upon their investigation, it was discovered that Head Mage Harrow Spellrot had been keeping Hollowed beneath the Institute. Harrow Spellrot had used the warding spell designed by Head Mage Teresa Goldendew to seal Hollowed beneath the Institute. According to Harrow Spellrot's own notes, he had been keeping these Hollowed for the purpose of study, most notably study into their life-stealing properties. It is unclear exactly when these experiments began, although Inquisitors conclude that Harrow Spellrot had Hollowed underneath the Institute as early as Inferior Sun 1286 Arc Thaw. After the emergence of Mors Omnia, Harrow Spellrot began experiments in which attempts were made to harvest the energy from within the Hollowed, then imbuing that energy into willing volunteers from his colleagues, students at the college, or paid commoners. These experiments ended in the deaths of 8 Institute researchers, 19 Institute students, and 31 citizens of Amberlin. Harrow Spellrot. It was necessary. Diane Runeward. On Superior Sun 1287, Toll Toil Ross 82, Harrow Spellrot made an unauthorized expedition to the windswept canyon and stole the body of Aureus Blackwood from the Memorial of the Fallen. Upon his return to the Institute, he performed his experiments on the body, causing it to become a hollowed. Harrow Spellrot. That's a lie. My experiment brought Aureus Blackwood back to life. Look at my notes. You'll see he had a heartbeat, he had breath, he asked about his dragon. He was brought back from the dead. Imperator Madeline Highcollar performs a spell that temporarily removes the air around Harrow Spellrot. Sigmund Skytide. Well, I have certainly heard enough. Clearly this man is deranged. Only the deranged can kill their own kinsman, claiming it was necessary. Lucian Ironhand. I for one concur, although I wonder if this has anything to do with his exposure to the Hollowed. Sigmund Skytide. You may be right, Lady Lucian. Spending so much time in a basement full of Hollowed drove the poor man mad. Harrow Spellrot. Madam Imperator, when Arcanists fall to Hollowed, I could bring them back. Imperator Varius, imagine if your Sky Wardens could fall out of the sky and be ready to fly again a day later. I assure you I am not mad. I just need more time to perfect the process. Madeline Highcollar. Is that the end of your report, Lady Diane? Diane Runeward. That is the end of all information relevant to this council, Madam Imperator. Madeline Highcollar. Harrow, I had high hopes for you. I truly believed you could have helped Amerlin fight the Hollowed threat. Harrow Spellrot. I still can. Madeline Highcollar. Council should have, by now, received a copy of the report read to you by Lady Diane. In addition, Council will notice the copies of Harrow Spellrot's notes on the unauthorized experiments have been included alongside it. Once you have read them, we can begin with sentencing. Azul Goldenhelm. Madam Imperator, I wish to ask something of Harrow Spellrot. Madeline Highcollar. What might that be? Azul Goldenhelm. If you truly believe that your work could benefit Amerlin, why did you do such in secret? Would your colleagues in Imperator not support you? Madeline Highcollar. Answer her question, Spellrot. Harrow Spellrot. I did not wish to disappoint Madam Imperator with unfounded theory, that is all. But I have results now. Lucian Ironhand. I have something to ask as well. Madeline Highcollar. Proceed, Lady Lucian. Lucian Ironhand. What did you plan to do about all the people you murdered? I know the Imperial Host Sentries and Arcane Legion had been looking into those disappearances for quite some time. Harrow Spellrot. Bring them back, of course, once I perfected the methods, that is. Lucian Ironhand. Except you didn't bring anyone back from the dead. You just made more Hollowed for us to worry about. Harrow Spellrot. Rex is not Hollowed. He's Aureus Blackwood. Without his memory, sure, but everything else is still there. The magic, the bond, the life, he is still in there. Please just give me more time, and I'll show you. Madeline Highcollar. Does Council have any further questions? Various Stormrider. I have a question for the accused. Madeline Highcollar. Proceed, Sir Various. Various Stormrider. Do you feel nothing? Harrow Spellrot. I'm sorry? Various Stormrider. Do you feel nothing for the lives you have taken, for the talent you robbed this country of, for the families whose sons, daughters, wives, husbands, sisters, brothers you stole? Harrow Spellrot. I had to. It was necessary for the greater good. Various Stormrider. That doesn't answer my question, Spellrot. Harrow Spellrot. You, of all people, should know. We are the same. Various Stormrider. I know every face that I send into battle. I know their names. I know their families. I know what I am taking from every one of them should they die under my command. I know what it is like to grieve with families that hate you for sending their loved ones to their deaths. I buried Aureus Blackwood beneath the Memorial of the Fallen with my own 2 hands, and I will do the same with every Sky Warden that falls to the Hollowed. You buried those you killed in a shallow grave in the woods, and lied to their friends and family for days regarding their whereabouts, and you have robbed the Blackwoods of their closure. A beast you created now walks in their son's skin, undoing all the good their son accomplished as one of my Sky Wardens. When they speak of Aureus Blackwood, it will not be as the noble Sky Warden who gave his life so that the rest of his court could retreat. Instead, he will be remembered as the monster you turned him into. We are not the same. Harrow Spellrot. But I can bring the dead back to life. Madeline Highcollar. That was never what this was about. Council will reconvene at sunfall for sentencing. Really well done, Raven. I really enjoyed this a lot. This court scene was really fantastic. And we had some different sort of temperaments and characters in here that all felt, like their own person. And this main character, I kind of like that they're a little uncertain, just a little uncertain, how unethical he was being and perhaps how deluded he probably is, but nothing is quite shoved in your face directly, which makes this, I think, a lot more compelling. So, what a fun first entry. I had fun reading this one. Nugget writes, The Death Day Party, an entry in Prometheus Society. Note, the Archivist is not the same character who's been speaking previously. He works for the Archivist. He isn't the Archivist. Also, Nugget says spoilers for new players.
Good evening, Hodu, right? I've heard much about you. Hello, that's me. Is this place yours? You have a lot of books and tape recorders like Bo does. You must know a lot of things if you've read all these. Well, what's your name? You may call me the Archivist, and yes, I do generally pride myself on knowing and on seeing. Could you tell me how reality works? Let's not get ahead of ourselves, dear Hodu. My followers and I have a bargain where they bring me information in exchange for information. What do you know that I don't? Oh, I know a lot of things, actually, like, Wade. He's not a very nice man, but my family needed the money. He killed me one time, but only halfway. He wanted to see what the other side looks like, I guess. So I'm half ghost, half person, but it's really... Dying isn't the tragedy everyone makes it out to be, just the way of life, really. All we can do is live while we live. Wade, I believe Chrome came from that place, too. You've seen the afterlife. Yep, so you can tell me about weavers, gods, reality itself? You are very curious, Hodu. I value that in those I work with. Tell you what, how would you like to work for me? Would I get a tape recorder? Of course, and an archival boon of my choice that I feel will help with your collections. But first, you're here for the Death Day party, yes? How we are! I'm planning on dressing up all pretty for it. Wonderful. It's being held by one of my warlocks. His name is Edward von Helsing. He came to me some years back following the death of his fiancée, hoping to find some form of solace. I am worried about him, to say the least, as are most of us. Probably the reason his sister even brought him to me was out of concern. He has an interest in life and death and the veil and necromancy. He always has. Anything else between those seems to be distractions to him, but he always returns to the same questions. I've been trying to stop him from doing anything irrational, but it is clear he is only associating with me out of benefit to himself, and now he is trying to distance himself from me. I don't know much about what he is doing while he hides from my eyes, but given how emotionally unstable he often is, I fear for the worst. I doubt you would need telling that what Edward is interested in is not something that should be touched. My proposition for you is simple. Check up on him. Check his loyalty towards me, if he does anything to betray me later on, and if he's about to do anything that everyone involved is going to regret. And if I check on him during the party, I get to work for you. Naturally. Deal. Wonderful. Oh, and Hodu. That's my name. I will warn you. Where Bo has his eyes, and Mina has her camera, Edward's archival boon is that of hypnosis. He will be able to manipulate people's senses, manipulate their minds, what they see, what they hear, even how they act. Those who hear his voice become his puppets. Tread carefully. I hope to hear from you soon.
Fun additional Hodu character, also this new assistant to the primary archivist, also just called the Archivist. Kind of curious about the hierarchy and like the sort of almost like the org chart that's going on here, sort of an expansive tree of who is reporting to who and people that are finding and recruiting. Kind of a fun little mess that we have here that is kind of engaging. Kendamarania writes, The Elven Princess, or Why Elves Live So Long, an entry in Return to Feylund. Kendamarania notes at the top, finally got this done after hacking away. It is very unedited, and there's probably stuff that could be cut or things to elaborate on. Literally writing this at 2 a.m., but it's all right. In the meantime, though, enjoy this fairy tale. The proper entry begins now. Tale adapted from Elvish Archive in Alphame, transcribed from oral tradition. There once was an elvish princess, long ago, a time before the gods departed and wonder creaked in every wood, before the dwarfs had vanished and when humans only peered into the realm's mirror. She was one of the earliest in the elves' royal line and was often left alone in the palace while the king and queen were busy attending to the kingdom's needs. The young princess was left alone for days at a time without caretakers and grew bored very quickly. By the time she was 8, the princess already knew every pathway, every room, and every servant's first and surnames in the palace. Her favorite place to go was the garden, where plants and flowers from every corner of Feylund would grow. She once fell asleep amidst the flowers after gazing upon the twinkling stars. In the morning, though, she was awoken by the roots' most foul call from the forest, followed by the tune of the ocarina. None of the other animals around her seemed to notice it, though. The screeching song howled on and on until the princess couldn't bear it anymore, and she marched into the woods to halt the cacophony. She looped in and out of the trees, guided by the song before encountering its source. A young page covered in brown and golden leaves, no older than her. Their scrawny fingers swayed to the music while they nodded along atop a small spring. The princess had to shout at the top of her lungs to get their attention. "Halt! What are you doing here, page?" "Oh, there you are. I was looking all over for you. I was lucky to find you here and not in the clouds," the child cheered, jumping down to shake her hand. Limitless colors swirled in their eyes as they greeted the little girl, the iris twinkling with stars of ages past. "Looking? But you were lazing about, disturbing the forest with your woodwind," the princess called out. "Ah, but that means only you could hear my wondrous song," the page said. "I grow bored of wandering the forest, listening to the birds' gossip and the butterflies' ramblings. Won't you come play with me in the vale? It's been so long since I had someone to play with after all." The princess was quite anxious about this question, as she never stepped out of the palace's limits prior. "Do you not have any siblings? Where are your parents?" The page laughed long and hard. "Parents? What are those but wardens that hold spirits prisoner? Come now." And they leapt from branch to branch, walking on air. The princess chased after them, tearing up her beautiful silk dress after tumbling down the hills and getting caught by branches. The two of them followed the stream downwards until they came across a great lake, with the elven palace reflected in the pool. The page dove head first into the lake, while the princess stayed at the dock. They then rose up from the surface, their white hair drenched. "Won't you come into the waters? I assure you it is much shallower here than you think." The princess shuddered. "But I do not know how to swim," she cried out. The page held out their hand for her. "I will teach you then. All the mysteries set by life, oblivion, and will, we can learn them, starting with how to tread the water. Trust me, it's as easy as walking on air." And the little princess looked down at the reflecting pool, her trembling feet at the edge of the dock. She held in her breath, grasped the page's arm, and fell 10 feet deep into the lake as she stepped forward. The page held her up by the armpits and surfaced to the shore, softly landing her on the sand while she coughed up water. "What was that, page? You said it was shallow." "There is nothing better than to learn from experience," the child grinned, all of their baby teeth showing at once. "Come, let us try again." "Peace, peace," cried the princess. "Who are you really? It is quite clear you aren't a normal fae." The page giggled as they hung upside down, meeting the princess eye to eye. "You know me by many names. Wonder, nonsense, irreality. Of all of them, I like magic the most," they grinned. Now the little princess was terrified. She heard stray stories in the wind about the dealings of magic, the temperamental and strange Zoa who twisted and turned forests together, who binded language with babblings and ramblings, who had the wondrous idea of decapitating Reason's head off at the genesis of Faelund. "I must go now," the princess yelped, skittering up the sand in a panic. "My mother and father will be awfully worried when they realize I am lost." "I mean no harm," Magic muttered. "You seemed awfully lonely in that palace all by yourself, and I grow bored and tiresome having no one to share stories with. I beg of you, my liege, won't you stay with me for one night longer?" And Magic offered their hand again, their fingertips flowing from brilliant colors. "I will show you all of the outside world. Please, oh princess, please." The little girl took one step back from the primordial god. She was still quite frightened of them and their unknowable powers. What if they turned her into a pillar of salt for their own amusement, or turned her body into clay so they could mold and sculpt her? And yet, they did none of them. In fact, Magic seemed antsy to be with her, starstruck by her inexperience. "If it means that I may return before supper," she stated, shaking their hand with a firm grasp. "Supper? My, we would be able to swim between Faelun and Earth before even tea time," Magic beamed with glee, taking her to the far side of the lake. They carried her across the kilometer-wide waters, occasionally diving down to see the schools of fish, crabs, and toads that roamed the deep waters. They waded all around, circling the perimeter and chasing the occasional Wispian boats who floated on through the day. The princess was delighted to see Magic so happy, as they were walking and flying through the surface water while they spun all kinds of imaginative stories that had occurred. They pretended they were mermaids looking for lost treasure in the Marius Sea, or wisps who sunk to the floor until they couldn't breathe anymore. Magic lifted her up when her arms got too tired, or paddled her legs when they got sore and cramped. Eventually, the princess was so tired of swimming she nearly passed out and washed up to the shore. Magic saw this and tried to shake her awake, as they had even more games they wished to play. "This isn't funny, you hear. Wake up and stop sleeping." But the princess did not respond, and Magic grew bored again. With a lift of their finger, they whisked her back to the palace, floating away like a leaf in the wind. When the princess awoke from her slumber, she earnestly thought that Magic was simply a dream. Her wounds from the lake had healed, and the king and queen sent the palace in a panic after learning their daughter wandered the Elfin Vale all alone. They ordered elvish guards to monitor the castle and protect the princess, as they feared that she would hurt herself again from wandering. The guards always kept a watchful eye on the princess, tracing her every step. But the princess still wished to find the star child on the lake. Under the guise of night, she snuck out of the palace walls and back to the garden, where she entered the forest once again. None of it was familiar for her anymore. The paths had changed, and the hills and valleys molded away. But she was never lost as she wandered, for she followed the faint shimmering light that hid from the trees. Then she heard the ocarina, and she knew now she was following the right path. The princess found Magic climbing up a mighty tree, trying to call to the birds with their horrible song. The 2 moons shone down the forest, and she wished to see the entirety of Faelund under the clear sky. The princess tore up her silk dress again as she tried to catch up with Magic, climbing up the tree until she could no longer see the ground. Magic would teach the princess a small bit of their own ways, helping her learn to fly and hop across thin air. The 2 of them chased each other in a game of tag, hopping from branch to branch until one of them fell. The princess would continue sneaking off into the Elfin Vale year after year to see Magic again. The 2 of them became such close friends they shared not a moment apart when they could help it. The princess was also comforted by the fact that Magic's presence was all where she walked. The winds were their breath, the warmth of the sun was their embrace, and the night sky was their own canvas. When the princess and Magic reunited, they played all sorts of games together. They pranked and terrorized the beech trees with illusions of fire, they chased a shooting star all the way to the Elfin Mountains, and they even dreamt of Earth while sleeping side by side. However, as the princess became older, it became harder for her to navigate the Elfin Vale and find Magic again. She would wander, but become lost as the song of their ocarina became faint. As she reached adolescence, she could hear nothing but a faint whisper of their woodwind. It reached as far as the palace while she studied under her tutors, always calling her to the forest. The king and queen were also becoming very old, as the elven lineage had always been limited by Oblivion's gift of death and age. They were content with their lives, but were not content that the princess was now 18 and yet was not married. She was always off singing poems and ballads by the lake where she first met Magic, hoping to find them again. The king and queen arranged for the princess to marry a fine young nobleman from Yosselfam, so she may continue the royal line as the new queen. Now, older and wiser, the princess was satisfied to marry a humble, simple man who wished nothing more than to make his arranged wife happy with her circumstances. For a fleeting moment, the princess forgot all about Magic, and paid little mind to her previous adventures in the Vale. The ocarina in the forest became nothing more than noise amidst the chaos of the palace the day before the princess's wedding. However, while the princess slept in her chambers at night, a small, sparkling light from the lake shimmered into the window. Manifesting from the mist, Magic made themselves visible again. They were just as young and adventurous as they were 10 years prior. Meanwhile, the princess had changed significantly, growing taller and fairer. Magic tugged on the princess's blanket, knocking over her beautiful wedding dress as they latched onto her shadow. "My princess, where have you been? Why haven't you come back in so long? Why are you bigger and grown up? What is this white dress?" And the princess was awoken by the storm of questions that came from Magic. She hardly believed it when she saw their colorful eyes once again, and she embraced them. "Magic, oh, Magic, where were you? I was listening for your song everywhere in the forest, and yet I could not hear it. My, you have changed so little," she sobbed into their milky white nightdress. "I have missed you too. I cannot go into the forest without wishing you were by my side," Magic cried. "I have so many more games I want to play. We could try lassoing the 2 moons together, or—" The princess shook her head. "I am afraid I cannot do it, Magic. I'm to be wedded tomorrow, and I shall be coronated as queen. My father and mother will die soon from age, and I shall take responsibility for ruling Faelund with my husband. I cannot simply run away like I used to anymore. Surely you can. Only for one night. Magic continued to tug onto her shadow. All my friends before had gone away because they grew and they disappeared into slumber. Will that mean that you will become just like those horrid grown-ups too, and you too will sleep? Sleep? Do you mean death? What is death? Magic asked. The princess's heart sank. Of course, that was why Magic failed to understand danger, how harrowing it must be to think the world only sleeps temporarily. It means we cannot play anymore because I, too, will soon join my parents and my children, and then their children will join me. We all only have so much time to hear your ocarinas playing upon infancy, and we shall receive Oblivion's gift. It spurs us to accomplish great things, to rule peacefully and justly, to create monuments and have empathy with the other Fae. How cruel can the crone be to rob you of life? Magic protested. How cruel can the godmother be to have us never play games anymore? How cruel can the charming prince be to spur only what you cannot see anymore? Magic held the princess's hand, rubbing her ring. I wish you not. I wish for your lineage to be young and free for much longer, centuries perhaps. You shall all have the blessing of eternal play, where you can all understand my games and not leave me away. Please, Magic. The princess placed her hand atop of theirs. I will still meet you when I return to the soil, where I shall become one with you. Life, oblivion, will, and reason, you need not be afraid. She thought for a moment. If you give us prolonged youth, I will swear that my people do everything they can to care for you and your essence. They shall learn your ways of game and play. None shall corrupt it. But please, I have a responsibility now to foster the Fae. Magic hesitated for a moment and touched her stomach. With a trace of their finger, her blood became blessed by Magic's timelessness, and, without a word, the child vanished into the air. The princess would rule the kingdom peacefully for 600 years, herself living for far longer. While she could never hear Magic's ocarina again, her mind adjusted to their eternal state of play, and she never felt an ache in her body. Some called it suspicious, some distrusted her unnatural age, but she was always content, and held unity together until her own memories of Magic faded, and thus she returned to the soil. Magic themselves would still wander the lake in the Elfin Vale. They tried to cheat Oblivion and revive her from death, to reincarnate the princess. The only successful attempt was them resurrecting their reflection upon the water. Still a little girl those centuries ago, the princess was always by the little child's side. Magic would not leave the lake for decades. They would always swim with the princess's reflection until they themselves grew tired, and the princess would carry them ashore. The end. You know, sometimes it is the works that we just pour out of ourselves at the last minute or at the late hours that really strike a chord, and I feel like this is definitely one of those. Sure, there's a little bit of stumbly prose in a couple of spots that could use an edit maybe, but overall, this is a really fantastic singular piece. I mean, it is a really great reflection of Return to Faelund and a lot of the vibes and a lot of the themes that Kendamarania is trying to build with it. And I really had fun reading this. I hope I did it justice. This was just really, really compelling. And very tragic in that, infinite, childish, innocence kind of way. For day 552, the prompt was, how is the time/date commonly marked down in your world? And this comes from NYUX in the Discord. Ed/Music Geekery writes, date format. Context information. Daystaras has 12 months, 30 days each, broken down into 5 weeks of 6 days. For general dating system, i.e. how school children might write it, it follows a format of year, month, day. For example, 1201/05/26. In historical text, the formatting will include the era. There have been 8 eras. The Althron, 5 Quothrons, and 2 Elthrons. Thus, in a historical text, the date would appear as such: Q3/Y1543/M8/D15. Nice. Short, sweet, And makes a lot of sense. I think this is a clever little simple system. I mean, it's obviously inspired by our own, but I like this extra delineation between historical versus more typical, in culture, in the moment kind of dating. NYUX writes, BG and AG. On Saruta, time started to be counted, or more like restarted, on the day that the God Wake ended, for it truly was a hard reset for existence. The survivors of humanity and the new emerging species of Lytians bonded together for a while, living in relative peace. Though the planet and time itself was shaken and stirred by the very fabric of reality coming apart and then painstakingly and painfully stitched back together by the gods, they rebuilt, they thrived, they found unity, they found peace. But peace never lasts. After a war between the gods, with the majority of the population only then awakening to their existence, just as the majority of them died, mortals realized they had bigger concerns than fighting amongst themselves. They relatively quickly left their archaic and now proven false beliefs, and after the unification of all languages into one universal language of Avili, true peace was for the first time achievable. This unity was celebrated by one central and unified time/date starting from 0. The system is that it takes 391 days for Saruta to circle their sun, and that's how the year was split. Each day/night cycle takes about 28 hours, with the old 60-second system still in place. The concept of a week or a month had been fully abandoned for its arbitrary rule set, and a much more simple yet effective system was implemented. No further division, just the day count of the year. Time is calculated from the day that the Godwake ended, so anything before it is called AG, or after Godwake, and vice versa. The proper, and still standardized way of marking the date/time is, first the time with hours, first then minutes, then seconds, and so on. 19 hour, 05 minute, 48 second. Then the day, 281, and then the year, 2393. As a full example, 19 hour, 05 minute, 48 second, 281 day, 2393 year. Special characters don't exist in written Avili, so descriptive and clarifying words/letters are important. Cool. We got some good history of Saruta here that we haven't really gotten in any other NYUX prompts. So I thought that was kind of an interesting element. We've kind of heard about the Godwake and stuff, but I think we got more details about it in this than we have in a pretty good chunk of other prompts. I know it's not really the majority of what NYUX focuses on for Saruta anyway, but it was cool to see that. For day 553, there were no submissions, but the prompt was, do you have any fictional political ideologies? What are their core values? And this comes from Kendamarania in the Discord. For day 554, the prompt was, what is a dark secret your world holds from its people? A fundamental shift in understanding that would fracture the world. And this comes from EclipsEternal in the Discord. EclipsEternal writes, the perfect kingdom of Citadel. An entry in Shattered Tale, BTS. In parentheses, yes, BTS is behind the scenes. Good, I'm glad I was right. The world is not as it seems. Information is hidden. People with knowledge are removed, but no place is worse than the great kingdom of Citadel. Terms of note. Monolith is a kingdom-sized construct that walks on a set path around the world. The Citadel is the pure city that sits on top of Monolith. The intercom crackles to life as you are teleported into the Citadel. We thank you for choosing Monolith as your mode of transportation. The next stop is the Frosted Mountain. We assure you that the Citadel is fully climate-controlled as we traverse the tundra. Feel free to use your scrying orbs to see what lies between the construct. We only ask that you refrain from entering designated employee-only zones for the duration of your trip. On the third day, the scrying orbs go dark as the daily intercom buzzes to life. We thank you for choosing Monolith as your mode of transportation. The next stop is home. Unfortunately, the scrying orbs will be unavailable for the duration of this leg of the journey. We apologize for the inconvenience. We only ask that you refrain from entering designated employee-only zones for the duration of your trip. With nothing to do, you head over to the inn for a drink. A mechanical mage has a seat next to you. He is exhausted and covered in grime and dirt. I've had enough of this place and its secrets. I'm going to tell you everything, but you have to get off tomorrow when Monolith approaches the Colosseum. Tell everyone the truth. They paved over a city and called it a failure. It sits just below the Citadel. People still live down there, and researchers use them for testing new relics. Mages are spent like common resources to keep the construct run. They have to know. He never got the chance to finish, and you never got the chance to tell anyone. The guards slaughtered everyone within hearing distance and hid the evidence. Monolith kept moving as if nothing happened, as it always was, as it always will. Kind of cool. I like the mystique to this. I think it's my only constructive criticism. I was a little confused by the formatting here. I thought the beginning was part of the main entry, but it was kind of context for the main entry, which I think was fine. It's a little jarring to move from that to the other one, and maybe that was just a lack of interpretation on my end. But it's also a shorter entry, so constructive criticism, not that useful, I don't think. And I probably won't give anything else. That was just the only thing that felt a little off. But I dig the mystique we have, the air of mystery that we have going on in this one. Probably the Great writes, something, staring, seething. An entry in What Lies West. Probably the Great notes at the top. Incomprehensible horror? Meet the persistent, the definable, the real. You'll get along swimmingly. The proper entry begins now. The floors and walls shift around it as the thing fumbles through a desolate citadel. It reaches through walls and searches rooms without looking, pinging like a radar, a constant droning broadcast of thoughts, searches for recipients unwilling. The monolith recalls hearing a response a time ago, or perhaps it recalls that it will in future. Time does not hold constraint over a spawn such as this. But there it is again. Distantly, infinitely far away and yet a finger's length away. Movement through the physical and not the mental, taxing and difficult. Conduct it now, it must be done. Another of the deep is here, hunting, participating too and as well. Its form is refined, consistent. It has been here longer. It knows the rules better. Hiding around a corner, the other spawn moves to grant the monolith entry into a lit room. Canals. A vacancy speaks out. It shields its eyes as the thing moves silently towards it. What kind is this one? Can I stab it, or is it the boring kind? Meaningless syllables fall upon the detections of the monolith. Well, given that it's not making much noise, and that it's not instantly vaporizing my head if I glance at it, a monolith? Back up into the door. I'll put down some salt. So no stabbing, no Gertz, it's phantasmal or something. We don't have any iron for once. Fine. The vacancies move in the physical, away. Annoyance is not a feeling that can be felt, but nonetheless would have came if it could. The shifting black fog with arms and legs moves forwards inch by inch. A threshold stands in the present between the room of the physical, the monolith exists within, and the one the vacancies have moved into at present as well. The vacancies remain in place despite the movement of time. They turn themselves away from the herald. Arms unfurl from infinite curvatures, looming over and almost into the threshold before searing, agonizes the painless. Recoiling, lamenting, the cloud of truth examines its appendages infinite, a color among billions resembling the ash of the beveled king, a burn mark, without a doubt. Again, another, again, another, again, another. Perhaps there is some sort of consistency. Another check must be made. Again, another. Again, another. It would seem that some sort of certainty is at play here. Is it seriously just bashing away at the salt? Really? I need to go back in there. One of those skellies had a necklace, was gonna give it to the wifey. It'll give up eventually. Again, another. Again, fine, fine. Annoyance should have been something at first felt. Just think different. Better? There. If the monolith could frown, it would now at present. The other follows behind in the mental, the refined one, the smarter. Oh, did you feel that? Yep, null figure? No doubt. Do me a favor and give me the salt bag. Don't rip it this time. I don't want to have to scoop it up again while you're getting possessed or whatever that was again. Please. Gert's ribmangler never gets his mind controlled. In the physical, the vacancy of greater mass blinds itself with matter of linen. You're about to get it, you flaccid, incomprehensible brain diddler. Dude, what? Nothing. Something physical has made contact. Impossible. It could not happen again. It seems to have occurred once more. It is agonizing. Strange. Again? Another? It would seem that on a metaphysical level, the monolith is being what could possibly be described by some with smaller mindsets as dying in agony. It wails in suffering with each impact of the bag. Eat it! Eat it all up, freak! Gertz. Die, 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 die. Fear is being comprehended and felt at the current point in time. If I could, I'd wear you like a pelt, Farpon. Gertz. Pain is annoying to feel, and is being felt currently as the time functions normally. The other moves away physically and mental in the present, shirking away at the scene and knowing better from its veterancy than to stick around. I'm gonna beat you to death. Oh. In the present, the agony has ceased to persist, effectively meaning that there is no longer pain. Responding to the current lack of negative stimulus in the present, the monolith makes impact with the larger vacancy, performing what some may call a violent and rapid relocation of flesh and therefore matter, as the vacancy is transpositioned to impact with physical structures within the material, inflicting blunt and internal trauma at a large scale which causes discomfort to material inhabitants such as vacancies, and therefore including the current assailing vacancy. Orpheus, damn it, Gertz! The smaller vacancy steps through the disjointment that had so befuddled the monolith in the prologue of the present. What did I say about ripping the bag? Sorry, Amelia, but that freak had it coming. Just sense at that thing. It's annoying me just by thinking about me with its stupid dissonant whisper bullshit. Andric's gonna love me yapping about tearing it open its first anus. No, he isn't. Grab a fistful of salt and hold it back. The larger vacancy feels around the room in the present for some of the substance causing persistent agony. The monolith attempts and fails consecutively to intercept. A bolt of the arcane impacts the already aching formation of matter that could be called the body of the monolith. The searing, what some would call golden, mote of light knocks the monolith into physical matter, which only serves to disorient its thoughts ineffectively as it calculates with endless numeracy. Rah! Impact and pain again. If it had a nose, the monolith would smell its own burning form, and the blood exploding out from its vacancy's hand as it makes contact with the eldritch form of the monolith. The vacancy strikes again and again. Volatile reactions between the salt in the fist, the matter of the spawn, and the skin of the orc make the room smell of a foundry of copper. The small vacancy in the back chants something that with each syllable sends waves of terror through the monolith, giving it a taste of fear in the present. Cassie! Thrumming tremors of power rupture through the mental. Sepith! Pain echoes infinitely across every time the monolith would have existed. Every second it existed, exists all at agony at once. Orphus! It is unbearable, it is suffering, it is begging in the dark tongue for mercy. Balash! The bells ring out in a cacophony of doom. The monolith is obliterated everywhere. Everywhen. Right, where'd the skeleton go? No! Clean up the salt! Fine. Oh, really fun, very different prose attempt here. This sounds like a fun, tricky little writing experiment, writing as a monolith, as this sort of very inhuman creature, sort of describing or realizing or how it experiences the time stream or time and space, as it were. Very cool. Again, hard to give constructive criticism here. There's a number of little things that I stumbled over when I was reading it initially, just thanks to spelling mistakes and some places where maybe there could be a little bit more punctuation. But overall, I think this was good. You had a really nice combo of juxtaposing the vault's inner thoughts with the characters outside, your regular flesh people, Gertz and Amelia, dealing with this, otherworldly thing. So I was really, really happy with the outcome here. For day 555, the prompt was, are there any religions or belief systems that frequently clash with each other in your world? And this comes from Kendamarania in the Discord. Ed/Music Geekery writes, my god can beat up your god. In Daystara, there are many religions, and many conflicting ideologies within those religions that tend to lead to warfare and other violent encounters between them. Perhaps the most famous and storied are the battles between the worshippers of the gods Gilistrin and Gilignal. Both gods promote concepts of strength and health, but whilst Gilistrin teaches that strength should be used for the pursuit of freedom, happiness, and the protection of others, Gilignal dictates that might makes right, and it should be used to claim dominance over all. These concepts have led to the nations of Crimbale and Kivakla being bitter enemies for centuries, the Crimbalan being the brave, stalwart, freedom-loving people, whilst the Kivaklans are craven, tyrannical types who delight in exploiting all. The other conflict of particular note is the church of Nicarus, the god of death, and the worshippers of Kadavrenos, the god of undeath. For the most part, this will simply be members of the church putting down crazed necromancers before they become a problem, but every so often, a cult will form up, or an infestation of undead will become particularly problematic, and it will fall to the paladins of Nicarus to put down these cells before they spread too far. I stumbled a lot over Krimbel and Kivakla, or however those are supposed to be said. Hopefully I got close on pronunciations. You do like to have some crazier words, I think, from a lot of people that we read. So I'm doing my best out here, and I hope I did a good job there. Good coverage on these couple of groups, and I like that one of these is actually just two different belief structures, and one is kind of fun because it is a religion and then versus cult, which where that line is drawn is kind of blurry sometimes. But I feel like those distinctions are kind of fascinating in a world-building sense. So cool stuff. Hal writes Heaven's War, and if I'm not mistaken, I believe this is Hal's first entry in Worldhammer. Heaven's War is what was described as the simmering, ideological Cold War that eventually went hot and the Tengri system. This was due to the two main religious ideologies, liberationism and constructionism. Liberationism, which is the majority religious ideology of the Outer System, is the belief that God, or gods, created all life equal, that beings deserve the right of freedom to enjoy and uphold the Lord's creation. Things like slavery, authoritarianism, and caste systems are seen as unholy and against God's will. What counts as these, though, sometimes varies greatly on the group and has led to frequent skirmishes and schisms within groups over the ideology. A growing subsect of liberationism is neo-liberationism, which includes AIs and artificial life within this. However, this form is much less popular due to how built into infrastructure these systems are and would raise a lot of uncomfortable questions. Constructionism, conversely, is much more motivated in the idea of caste structures and predestination. You are born into your role, and as such were chosen to fulfill it. It is the most popular within the inner system, specifically the Auhminous Economic Committee, who coincidentally use a lot of slave labor. It's less a deeply held religious belief, and more just an excuse to perpetuate their system. This hard clash of religious dogma has made the inner and outer sphere bitter rivals, and a slowly looming religious war due to it. Cool. I really like the naming conventions here. Liberationism and constructionism, I think, are really evocative. And your descriptions, though brief, do a really good job of giving us a great picture of what this sort of feud looks like. There's a couple of rough sentences in terms of constructive criticism. And I think this is very personal constructive criticism. But I would like constructionism maybe to be less on the nose as the evil one. It should be on the nose in the interpretive aspect, but don't tell us directly that it's an excuse. Make that implied via the actions or descriptions of constructionism's existence in the inner system, which you already did. I mean, coincidentally used a lot of slave labor. That's perfect. And that's a personal thing. So that's heavily take with a grain of salt on that constructive criticism, because that's my own, how I like media to present itself to me, not too overt on the face, unless that's kind of the whole thing. Obviously, there's nuance there, but very cool. Great first entry. The Wanderer writes, Order of Sandsea versus Eidenhain, an entry in Endrin. It comes to the surprise of many that not all Paragon orders get along, especially when it comes to actually taking up arms against each other. For the Order of Sandsea versus the Order of Eidenhain, it has been a very, very long conflict. Their conflict further confuses outsiders by both believing in freedom of religion and not being particularly hostile against those outside their own. Moreover, as far as scandals or terrible histories, they're both lacking. By all accounts, they're both outstanding and exemplar standards of moral paragon orders. Another reason for the bafflement of all is that both the orders get along with just about all the other orders, even those with much stronger conflicts in ideologies. By all accounts, they should be a closely tied sister order. But they're nemeses instead. The ideologies of the Sansi, besides their mutual ideologies like respect other people and protect the innocent that both share, is that their role in the world is to act as an extension of the sun, to purge and burn away all evil. They hide their faces behind masks to signify their devotion to being a servant of the sun rather than an individual. They also pray at sunrise and sunset, leaving a small, barely prick of a knife wound to signify that they are just mortal, but they persist in their cause regardless. Despite having gold magic, like most paragons, they are very much against the use of healing magic, viewing it as a defilement of the pure cleansing power of the sun. The Order of Idenhain, on the other hand, trained to use healing magic better, view the injury of an innocent as a sad event. Even small wounds are unfortunate, and they are not exceptions to that rule. Their prayer times are set at doing things like eating or sleeping rather than a set time each day. Despite their seemingly unfounded rivalry, both orders join to fight demons if the chance is encountered without a second's hesitation. Man, you really left us with a lot of questions. What specifically about these two has caused this? Very interesting. I like these descriptions of sort of where they do differ and where they are similar. I want to know, what caused all the tussle? Nugget writes, throw out the gods, but keep the culture, an entry in Time Traveler and the Immortal. No one knows the gods. Not completely, at least. Just as people have different faces around different friends, different groups, different servers, with their parents, at their work, or alone, the gods are the same. No one has a full, complete, and unbiased view of the gods. They all see different parts of the same gods and worship them differently based on what they see. Even if the gods still have a main inspiration behind their design and backstory, such as how Mors and Vita are inspired by Isis and Osiris, Ignis is based on the Rainbow Crow, Ocean is Sedna, Emrys is Jesus, and Stella is God with a capital G, those are not completely strict. Ignis may be the Rainbow Crow, but the same Ignis is also known as Pele, is known as Prometheus, is known as Vulcan, is known as Kagatsuchi. It's all the same guy, but different parts of the world see him differently. Mors is the same, Osiris is the same, Anubis is the same, Hades is the same, Thanatos is the same, Yama, so on and so forth. Different cultures see and latch on to different aspects of the gods. There are certain gods certain cultures don't even know of, and there are gods basically completely made up either by wishful thinking or by interpreting one god as multiple, such as Mors splitting into both Osiris and Anubis in the same religion. Generally, everywhere in the world knows the main six and Stella, and then the lesser gods are more situational based on needs and culture. Even more monotheistic religions such as Christianity or Judaism are interpreted as mostly just worshipping Stella, though they still know and acknowledge those other gods exist. But every part of the world will still mischaracterize or misinterpret them in at least some way through no fault of their own. And where there are different interpretations of the gods and how they are meant to be worshipped, there is conflict. Even those who worship the same interpretations of the gods still disagree. I mean, just look at how many different religions stem from the same Bible and how little even those get along. Look at the Crusades or how much of Norse mythology has been painted over by Christianity. And then the Divine War happened. The Divine War happened, and humanity turned against the gods, due in large part to Emrys's meddling, also directly referencing Christianity painting over a whole lot of religion. The hatred of the gods almost turns into its own religion, as various extremists completely turn around in their treatment of the gods, treating anything done in their name as blasphemous. But humans generally don't do well with change. They don't like being told that everything they've done so far was for nothing. So throw out the gods, but keep the culture. That's the best way I can describe it. The traditions are no longer about the gods, but about the meaning. It's like how atheists still celebrate Christmas or maintain their own morals even without a church. But it's like that with everything else. Jewish people still have their traditions such as Hanukkah, Bar or Bat Mitzvah, even Shabbat, etc. Because that's what they've always done, and it's more about the tradition and community than it is about the gods. Same goes for other cultures and religions. They just no longer worship the gods and no longer pray. The Cogwins have 7 children because they don't believe in contraception, not because they want as many as God allows, but because of more tangible, a larger family has more opportunity to continue the family name and the family views. Phineas and Amelia also have not gotten divorced because culturally they are both against it, not because they consider it a sin, but because it's not socially acceptable. Phineas specifically is often, though not completely incorrectly, misinterpreted as being a lot more religious than he actually is. He is still very much written to appear that way, that overly religious family member who thumps the Bible constantly before turning around to tell his son he's going to hell for being gay. but he doesn't actually believe in hell or sin, nor does he even like the gods or any Bible if one ever existed. His hatred is less about, this is what the divine says is right and wrong, and more like, this is what my family and community have told me my entire life is right and wrong, and I'm going to uphold that. Even those, like the Cogwins, whose religion at this point genuinely is their hatred of the gods and of magic, there are still differences in flavors. Humans can't even hate people the same way. They still have various and differing fingerprints of their old religious ways. The Catholics and Protestants have shaped a lot of European history because of their conflicts regarding their own rules within the same general belief system, and that still happens. The Cogwins were actually forced out of Germany due to what was essentially religious persecution, as witch-finding, as well as other interpretations of the gods, began to become less acceptable with the views held there as the government changed. Even though religion doesn't exist, different values still create those same conflicts. Yeah, this is going to be one of those entries that I'm just reading back like, man, I hope any of this makes sense. TLDR, humanity no longer worships the gods, but still maintains a lot of their rules and customs and even conflicts because of traditions and differences in cultural values. I think you've hit on something really interesting historically, which is just the fact that so much of religion really comes from the comfort of tradition. I mean, the perpetuation of religion, anyway, is really, really heavily as a structured societal thing, perpetuated by traditions that make people feel comfortable. People like to have something that they can turn to for comfort and for a thing to do when you don't know what else to do. Also, fun side note, monotheism in which you believe in multiple gods, but see one as the only one worthy of worship or as the most powerful, I think is called henotheism. So fun thing to look into. Good word to use in world building, and kind of a fun way to make your religions a little bit more diverse, as opposed to sort of just sticking to the more common polytheism and monotheism. Kendamarania writes, "Nothing but fairy tales, an entry in Return to Phalund." Excerpt from A Treatise for Zoatic Belief by Sarura the Clear-Sighted, the current leader of the Witches, written 1126 EE. The witches that we knew before are gone. Far away are the days when they were simple nuisances who independently forged magic in tiny huts. They have burnt the Marwood, sacked the marble city of Hjoselfam, and tried to shackle the Snurgs to the ground. With none of the elves to keep order and peace thanks to the cowardice of Prince Galaric, they have brought nothing but misery to this land. When I look out from the halls of the Chroma Mountains, I cannot help but ask myself why they seek to upheave these fields with such brutish efficiency. But I believe they have one common cause: magic. Magic is wild, untamable, and wholly unneeded for the Fae. Belief in magic's benevolence, as well as that of the Zoa, is similarly baseless. The witches that currently rule under us are utterly obsessed with the Zoa of Oblivion's foregone fate. They have too much faith in magic's abstract nature, blind to the fact that it has ridden Phalund with plague and famine by its own whims. This has been a problem in our realm since the Elven era, as harmony and adherence to magic's unchanging wishes has held back society for a millennia. Change in the witches must first come by uncorrupting magic influence over our societies, starting with the Zoa. Too long have we been believing in old fables, legends, fairy tales that have warped our perception of the world. War no longer has to be waged for the whims of an abstract force, who wish to use the Fae as playthings, nor will it play its hands on our lives. The witches atop the Wispian Mountains are forever stuck in the past, chasing stars whilst trampling upon the land. The Fae can be one with reason as our guiding light. All we need is to move past magic's ebb and flow. Cool little diatribe from this individual who clearly has a bone to pick with magic, all of the past powers that be, and the current powers that be in the witches. Really compelling stuff. I like this a lot. My only thing I was confused about here, you can take this as constructive criticism, or you can take this as Ox, you just didn't get it, which is very fair. Is that I wasn't 100% sure on the witch hierarchy situation here, which we don't really necessarily need to be, but I was a little confused by, where this witch finds themselves in that hierarchy and the ones they reference where they find themselves. That I was a little lost on that, but really like this nonetheless. For day 556, the prompt was, who is a person/entity who everyone wants on their side? And this comes from NYUX in the Discord. Kendamarania writes, Chewy Robotics, an entry in Ultrakill Cataclysmic Ouroboros. Chewy Robotics is one of the few mega corporations remaining in the 2110s. Originally a Chinese weapons manufacturer, they survived the rise of the Earth Movers and the fall of nations by shifting away from human firearms to biorobotics. They are renowned throughout the world for two products: the Sentry Mode, a walking antimatter rifle with durable legs, and the Drone Model, mass surveillance machines armed with non-lethal ammunition. Chewy Robotics plays no sides in the final war. They are loyal to no Earthmover, herd, or entity. All they want is profit from the war's bloodshed, selling their war machines to the highest bidder and having offices on hundreds of Earthmovers. Their reliability and efficiency beats out scavenged and repurposed robots, so you'll often see their products on nearly every herd and conflict. Different corporate entities have also tried to compete with Chewy Robotics' mass production line. One, on the Earthmover RA1-J1N, seems to have made progress on a supreme machine capable of speeds and repair times faster than even the drones or sentries. Ultrakill is a great game, so I really do love that Kendamarania has kind of started work and started sharing with us some work on this Ultrakill AU. It's super fun to read on. I'm assuming there's a hint at the end to the main character from the game, and I don't know enough about the lore, but I do dig the very far future post-apocalyptic feel of the whole thing and the weird religious aspects of everything, and it'll be fun to see more and more of that maybe come through Kendamarania's little AU project. EclipsEternal writes, The Right Hand of Grimm, an entry in Shattered Tale, number 6, CKC, Act 6. Last known location, New Haven. Current status, unknown. The dead have become restless. The Overseer is having to work overtime to collect the fallen. Death has not been seen in 7 weeks. End of public data. Please enter credentials. Credentials accepted. Death is dead. His body was found and his death was covered up by the Aetherhold Library. No new information is permitted to the public at this time. I'm not sure how long they will accept our lies. The Overseer can only do so much to collect the souls. Please enter credentials for higher clearance. Welcome, Archivist. This is bad. The prophecy is coming to fruition. The angel has arrived to usher in a new age. We can't let this information out to the public. It would cause mass hysteria. Send notice to secretly refit and retitle Monolith into the walking siege engine. We do not have much time. In the meantime, I will try to find a replacement for the Archon of Grimm. The people will be more accepting of our lies if their dead actually died. I think there's some fun, hints at interesting problems needing to be solved here. There's a lot we don't know. It's another really short entry, and so constructive criticism is a little tough. I do really like this style. I think, the classified document being read out like an SCP or something is always kind of fun. I do think the only thing that's a little bit confusing is some kind of information on what kind of document this is, because it just kind of sounds like someone's journal, and then it also kind of sounds like someone's regular exposition writing for a world, so it doesn't 100% mesh with the style you're going for. So something like, log of so-and-so or diary of so-and-so that primes us for how to interpret the way that the text flows is super useful. The Wanderer writes, Honsier Lord of the Cosmier House, an entry in Endrin, Middleworld. Estria is split into 9 sections, each ruled over by a house. Ideally, the houses were all supposed to be of equal power. Each house was given control over a crucial aspect of Estria. House Cosmier oversees the standing army of Estria. The lord of the house is Honsier. Honsier as a youth was an incredibly gifted warrior and about just as gifted in strategy. Given as well that he is a noble imbued with the power that comes in his bloodline, made him a terrifying force to be reckoned with. He became the house lord at the age of 20. As a noble, he needed to be wed, and he had fallen madly in love with a commoner, which would not be allowed. A consort was possible, but he refused to have the woman he loved reduced to such a rule. He besought the king to give her a noble rank. The king, who already thought the Cosmier house was too powerful, gave him a suicidal mission, storming a castle without reinforcements to take down Estria's biggest rival. If he succeeded, the king swore he would make her a noble high enough for Honsier to marry properly as equals, and Honsier agreed. 3 days later, at the gate rode in a lone warrior, armor covered in dents, pieces of crossbolts, and covered in dust. It was Honsier. And as scouts would confirm, he left a fortress in ruins. It was intended to kill him, and he won. The king didn't dare break his word. Hansier was able to marry his wife. Given his newfound respect, Hansier began making deals with the other houses. In 20 years, he had managed to make House Cosmere by far the most powerful house, and make its reputation admirable. And many agree that he might actually hold more sway in the nation than the king himself, and well, after what the king saw, he wasn't going to challenge it. Fun having these little tidbits of these stories, and you wonder, well, what did Hansier do? Why is he so powerful / strong / capable? There's hints that maybe it's a strategy. It's good. It's well put together. NYUX writes, IO. A faction powered by machines, metaphorical or not. Everything in every organization on all sides of the conflict is based off the network. Their own, or the common one, it doesn't matter. Not to him. Some say he's not even real, but the most advanced network there is. I have seen him. He is very real. Nobody ever sees him. It won't be long now. There's nothing else I can do. I didn't know who I was after. I just did what I was ordered. He's just a small, kind, weak, and unassuming looking man, but he has eyes everywhere. He is everything. He is one with the networks, and the networks are everywhere. He could bring it all down. He could wipe out everything overnight. I know he could, but he just doesn't. I know I shouldn't dig deeper. I've already gotten too close. I can feel him around me. That's how he does it. He becomes one with the system. I've never seen someone with such a powerful power before. I think it's casting mixed in and his own hardware too. I don't know how he does it, but I know he does it better than anyone could ever dream of. I've seen him, and I know he saw me. He seemed almost kind, but I can't call something so powerful someone who had single-handedly killed thousands kind. But I don't know him. Maybe that's why he chooses to remain in the background. He has also saved countless. Nobody dares to make a move on him. They're all too scared. I've never seen them so scared before. I don't know what else to do. You're the only one I know of to have connections with him. I've seen you two together, and I know what it is you do. But I don't have any other choice. I'm begging for my life. Let him know that it was never my intention to push. If I knew who my target was, I would have declined or just taken out myself. I'm very good at my job because I'm here instead of underground, and I'm willing to do anything. Please, not this time. And what might be in it for me? Fine, I won't leave it open-ended and all mysterious for once. I'll give more character info. Io was unfortunately born to one of the few remaining lines of purists within Xandra. Purists hate hybrids and think of them as unnatural and that they should be eradicated, although they live amongst a society filled with them. His parents weren't supposed to breed since they were of different species and they could cause the horrid, awful, bad thing of a hybrid child. When he was born, and to everyone's relief, he seemed to only have one parent species. He was only born with the ears/tail. Then, a couple of months later, he sprouted the moth wings of his other parent, which is relatively normal as a late bloomer. The purist community saw this as an outrage to existence itself, and they locked him away from the rest of the community and society for everyone's sake. But then, a few years later, he sprouted horns, something nearly unheard of. I'm not going to lie, NYUX, that end doesn't clear that much stuff up for what we actually read. It is interesting, though, this Io character being this sort of hybrid outcast. Kind of fascinated by the whole network thing. A fun little piece, if definitely pretty mysterious. For day 557, the prompt was, who was the most controversial or hated person in your setting, whether or not they actually did anything wrong? And this comes from Kendamarania in the Discord. EclipsEternal writes, Greed, an entry in Shattered Tale behind the scenes. New character. Info. The Grand Masquerade is an organization made up of 17 people using custom-made relics. These relics were known as the Masquerade Masks, and every mask had a unique design, unique name, and unique ability. There were 3 masks that, under the right circumstances, were stronger than the rest. Cheers, Collection, and Greed. Cheers and Collection held immense potential, but Greed was feared. Greed was the mask under War's domain. It had a very simple ability. It would scale in power to be slightly stronger than whatever its opponent. Worse off, it could even scale to take on several opponents. Because of this, Greed almost never had a host. When it did have a host, it was volatile and acted on a whim. Unlike the other members, you couldn't overpower it. It could only be beaten in a fair fight. When the Masquerade King fell, Greed was the first mask to be destroyed. The world breathed a sigh of relief when Greed was destroyed. I think for constructive criticism is just that there's so much detail missing here that it's really hard to put some pieces together. I mean, the mask idea is super interesting. I think it would be cool to know more about how these function, what we meant by things like stronger and opponents and fights and things. Especially when you have things like the greed mask always scales up to be slightly more powerful, and you say it can only be beaten in a fair fight. That part's sort of interesting, a little bit confusing. There's just some conflicting wording here, maybe, is what may be confusing to me. I like this idea, though. I do love me a good, like, masquerade theming. It is super fun. That was the last day in terms of prompts, but now we come to Hammer Sparks, where our world builders or writers can submit writing of any kind, regardless of theming or prompting or any of that, or it can be old prompts if they would like, and we will read those out. First come, first serve, always 3 slots, unless there are some kind of other extenuating circumstances in which I add more or take some away. Kendamarania writes, Ultra Kill, Overture, Cataclysmic Ouroboros, World Introduction. This is the only way it could have ended. This is the only way it should have ended. 200 years of war has left the Earth in ruin. Beginning in 1914, as the central power of Europe unleashed experimental, blood-fueled machines across the trench lines, it has escalated into all-out devastation that burned lush fields and dried out the seas. The ultimate supreme machine was born after a century of bloodshed, the Earth Movers, towering walking automatons capable of leveling cities in an instant. They completely changed the course of the final war. Humanity was forced to live on the backs of these Earth Movers as their planet became inhospitable. The long night had begun. Countries and nations were left irrelevant. The final war was at an eternal stalemate. Now, in the 2110s, a family of researchers living with an Earth Mover pack is working on building a blood machine capable of destroying an Earth Mover from within. The next evolution of the final war. Internal name, the V-Series. Ultra Kill, Cataclysmic Ouroboros is a fan-fiction side project based on background lore of the indie FPS shooter Ultra Kill. Focusing on the waning years of the final war, it provides context and additional insights on V1's creation. It also contains world building on how humanity could possibly survive this apocalyptic event. As the lore is sparse and left to the player's interpretation, a good majority of the writing here will be original. This will not contain explicit spoilers for the main plot of the game, as that is Gabrielle's story, not V1's. I really did enjoy it when I played Ultra Kill, and I need to go back to it. And the implicit lore and everything is so cool, so it'll be really fun to see Kendamarania's interpretations as we go along. I am definitely looking forward to that. From the Great Rights, Siegers Rewritten, an entry in What Lies West. Where the artist tells her connoisseurs, the Eye of Oblivion plays a game of chess, one which started before the moon and one that will continue after it shatters. Its pawns move forward again. Again, its bishops hold seance again. Again, its knights sharpen blades again. When the last bell knolls, when the final sun is set, as the single poet wakes, the city will cry, its citizens will weep, its armaments will be without wielder. So connoisseurs, the artist reminds her patrons to strike down those pawns lest they become the queen. Seamstress Junabelle. Call signs: muffled laughter, infrequent mind whispers, sound of scraping metal, smell of curses described as vinegar, smell of graviturgy described as petrichor, smell of archaeoscript described as caramel. Shamblers are eldritch spawn that hail from the true desert of the west, with them being sighted frequently on the horizon bordering the city of worms, amassing in number. Shamblers often are compared to stretched-out humans with long, dangly limbs that barely keep the creatures upright. Their flesh is a sick, blood-red hue and holds the consistency of clay or wax depending on age, with the substance hardening over time, eventually immobilizing particularly old specimens. Over this flesh, an artificial, dull white metal armor holds together the red flesh with numerous underlying arcane glyphs, namely 2 archaeoscript words, Calypse and Egon, and a graviturgy word, Ares. These magic runes are what even allows a shambler to move with the destruction of armor segments, removing locomotion from their respective limb. With the consistent height of 9 feet between individual specimens, shamblers tower over most adventurers, staring down at them with numerous eyes covering their face. On their face, hidden under the armor, is a crude mouth incapable of articulated speech. The shambler solely uses this mouth, and an unknown lung source, to laugh during slaughter. Whether this is voluntary or not, it serves to demoralize mortals as they slice into them with crude, rusty weapons, or at least it seems at the surface. The weapons are comprised of eldritch energy. Though heavily refined and safer than other sources, if a mortal were to wield one such weapon, they would quickly lose their mind. Shamblers are known most for their strange behavior regarding the City of Worms. When colonizers first started refitting the city before adventuring was authorized at full scale, several town guards reported numerous times that at sunrise they could see numerous figures silhouetted against the dunes wielding weapons. Numerous times, the guard captain, Elsroy Ishve, came only to see nothing against the horizon. This went on until almost every guardsman reported seeing the figures, and though many thought it delirium, it only took another week for them to be proven wrong. The Shamblers attacked in the thousands. The underprepared City of Worms couldn't hold back the deep tide, and many lives were lost between the unarmed citizens, the town's guard, and adventurers-to-be. While the city has recovered, and most citizens nowadays likely do not even know of Shamblers, it requires regular exterminations every week to cull the number of Shamblers amassing outside the walls, lest they besiege again once they reach a critical mass. So long as they are not accompanied by another, more intelligent spawn, such as perhaps a monolith, a Shambler will remain in place until commanded otherwise or attacked by an outside force, such as a mortal. Shamblers are incredibly dull unless controlled by another spawn, with the most common commissars seen commanding them being the Things in the Dark and Immolators. Each spawn has their own methods and results when commanding Shamblers, with attacks led by null figures being far more cold and coordinated, and ones led by Immolators often being brash and more likely to fail. Immolators, of course, only started commanding Shamblers recently after their sudden and near catastrophic introduction to the West. Without a way to track down their source, only speculation can be made as to the origins of the Shamblers. They have existed for as long as we have wondered what lies west, and if the legends of old are to be believed, even once assailed ancient Koros, though in those stories they are never called Shamblers. In combat against a Shambler, avoiding overheaded attacks is key. The force with which they attack is difficult to block even through shields. Keeping light on your feet and striking the legs to bring the head into range of attack is key, as severing the head is the quickest way to demobilize a Shambler, as killing a Shambler requires ritual or complete incineration of its flesh. As true spawn, Shamblers do not need to eat, sleep, or drink, and therefore do not play a part in the ecosystem. The town's guard humbly ask that adventurers show them what for on encounter and help to mitigate their threat on the city. Okay, yeah, I remember these from before, called Siegers, now called Shamblers. And I think the rewrite is good. I don't remember enough about the original document to give too much feedback in terms of whether or not this is a huge improvement, but I think you've been nicely thorough with this one. And I was happy to finally see a cool depiction of these. Nugget drew the art that you saw during the reading of the prompt, and it aligns really nicely with what you've discussed here, Predwin. I really tried to think for a little bit, Predwin, on what I could give as constructive criticism here, but I think I'd have to dive really deep into this one to give much, because nothing stood out on its face. At first, I kind of felt like maybe there was a bit of a hole in maybe missing a descriptor of how they came about in possession of the Shambler parts to examine, or who would have examined them, but that didn't seem that substantial. I mean, it's easy to intuit that there was a lot of dead ones at one point. You got pieces of them. Somebody looks at them and says, hey, they've got these glyphs. So I would have to spend so much more time on this that I don't have, unfortunately, and all I can say is that I enjoyed it. Nugget writes our final entry for Worldhammer episode 18, titled Family Man, an entry in Time Traveler and the Immortal. Content warning: suicide, mental illness, domestic and physical abuse. Phineas Cogwin is a family man through and through. He has a wife whom he loves and has many children with her. He cares very deeply for all of them and wants them all to do well. He is a man of his time. The Victorian era had a running theme of just not wanting to think about things that bothered them. Things like gay people, trans people, people suffering from mental health issues, the concept of women. They knew they exist, but it's better to just not think about it. It will go away eventually. It is a fatal flaw shared by most of the Cogwin family. Stick your head in the sand, don't acknowledge the problem, it will go away if you just hide it. Phineas's father was a witchfinder much like he was. He suffered from PTSD and depression, though he wouldn't have been given names for either. He drank and pushed it down and remained an upstanding and normal member of society. No one noticed anything was wrong. No one noticed until Phineas walked in on him after he hung himself. He didn't know why. Why would he? Succumbing to mental illness was a moral failing, and Phineas was a moral man. He joined the army despite his dreams of the sea, and much like his own father and his own society, hides his problems rather than admitting there are any. When you are taught your entire life that magic is evil and that what you are doing is right, why would you question it? Phineas was an only child, likely because of complications regarding his own birth, so he was obligated to continue the family business. He is a family man, after all. He married Amelia, a woman he loved once. Once? No, he still does love her. That's his wife. He chose her. He loved her. He might have been attracted to both men and women. That attraction to men being yet another non-issue that was better left ignored. That's what everyone else does, after all. But he chose to be with her. They have 7 children together. Phineas loved being a father once. He loved his first 4 children, watching them grow and develop and holding them in his arms. But his favorite was always his eldest, Victor. Practically a clone of himself, aside from the odd bit of vitiligo in his hair. His eldest and his heir. He was perfect. And then Victor started showing signs of magic. He was caught between a rock and a hard place. He was a witchfinder, a respected one at that. He knows magic is evil. He knows there is no cure. He knows if he followed his own training, he would have to kill his own son. He is a family man. He couldn't do that. Besides, killing Victor would mean admitting there was a problem, and he couldn't have that. So he instills in his son that same fatal flaw. Hide the problem. If you hide it well enough, there might as well not be a problem. A once kind and loving father, if maybe a bit strict, began to warp. He pulled Victor into witch-finding early, teaching him the signs of those taken ill and demonstrating what happens to those caught with magic. He became far more strict, forcing Victor into a box and beating him for stepping outside of it. After all, what would happen if anyone other than himself found out about his son's ailments? Something far worse than the broken bones Phineas gives him. All the while, Amelia grows distant, trapped in a house and a marriage with a man such as Phineas. After all, the Victorian era wouldn't care about postpartum depression or psychosis. It would simply be labeled hysteria, and it was better to pretend that everything was fine. Submit to your husband, however he chooses to treat your children, and smile in public. But her eyes began to wander as she can no longer look at Phineas the same way. They wandered towards a man with black hair and brown eyes. It's difficult to tell if Phineas ever knew about his wife's affairs, but her eldest children certainly did. In a way, her pathological lying was a double-edged sword. On the one hand, she's the reason no one knew about Victor's conditions. On the other, she's why no one knew how Phineas was behind the scenes. To anyone else, Phineas Cogwin is a family man. He has a respected job that he loves and a family he loves even more. He runs his home with a firm but fair hand, and everything is fine. His wife is not cheating on him. His son does not have magic. Mental illness does not run in the family. Amelia was not trying to drown their youngest in a bathtub. Phineas was not beating their children. Victor's just accident-prone and stubborn, and everything is fine. Everything is fine. Where the hell is Victor? He's been gone a week now. Speak up, Amelia. You wouldn't want to hear it. If it is regarding the whereabouts of my son, then I believe you are mistaken. Speak. Ernest was telling me about a few weeks ago he had walked in on Victor with one of your pistols, pointed at his own head. Why do you bring this up? Face it, Phineas, our son is dead. You killed him, whether you chose to accept it or not. I like the empathetic perspective here. I think Nugget does a good job, and I've said stuff like this before, about taking into account, the historical context people existed in. Not saying that they're in the right, but attempting to depict realistically why someone in that era would behave in ways that we see as diabolical, and try and help maybe us to understand why such actions make sense according to these people. Again, it doesn't make what Phidias does correct. However, I think as human beings, it's healthy to be able to have empathy for people like this, despite the horrible things that they're doing. And I appreciate, too, that Nugget very heavily acknowledges this idea of someone largely being a product of nurture and their environment, which is an important thing also to consider when people behave in certain ways. A great final entry, and thank you for listening. Please rate us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. The more people we can share all this wonderful writing with, the better. We'll see you next time, and may your world never be lost in the fires of the forge of the World Hammer. Bye-bye.